Hey guys, you are watching your anime world. How are you all? Please support to subscribe this channel for watching new interesting stories. So in this video, we will see what if Deku became an inside man and turned heroes into villains. Here is short summary. Midoriya Izuku was a hero fanboy, all the way. He still had his doubts over how perfect heroes were, but that didn't stop him from dreaming. Even if he was quirkless, and everyone said he couldn't, he still hoped he could become a hero. All that changed the day his best friend told him to jump off a roof. He almost died by a sludge villain. His number one hero crushed his dreams and left him alone on a rooftop, and all his faith in hero society shattered. He now had a new dream. If society said he couldn't be a hero, he would be the one to destroy it instead. And what better way to bring down a system than from within? But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible, share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. All men are not created equal. This was the reality Izuku learned about society at the young age of 4. And that was his first setback. All Izuku ever wanted was to be a hero. Even when he was pronounced quirkless, he didn't give up on his dream. He was still confident that his lack of quirk would not stand in his way. He made up for it with his intelligence and analytical mind. He would watch heroes fight and take notes on them and their quirks, their strengths and weaknesses, their fighting style and support items, and even had suggestions for improvement, ways to counter their drawbacks, and possible gear. Izuku was a hero fanboy all the way, but his favorite by far was the symbol of peace, the number one hero, All Might. What he wouldn't give to become just like him, like he and Kacchan planned since they were toddlers. He would now laugh at his younger self's hopes and dreams. But let's take the story from the beginning. Izuku was rushing through the crowd. A huge villain was going rampant on the rooftop of Teituan Station. They were screaming and tearing down power lines, causing them to fall near the civilians that had gathered in the area. Just as one of them was falling, Death Arms rushed in and stood underneath and caught it with his bare hands. Izuku had already filled a few pages in one of his hero analysis for the future notebooks with information and thoughts about the punching hero. There were a few more heroes at the scene, like the rescue specialist Backdraft, and Kamui Woods, who was the first to attempt at restraining the villain. Izuku made his way to the front to have a better view. Just as the hero unleashed his ultimate move Lacquered Chain Prison, a female voice echoed, followed by a huge woman rushing to the scene, pronouncing the move with which she kicked the villain, causing him to fall from the bullet train station and onto the ground. The woman, who stood taller than 20 meters, turned to the highly surprised journalists present and announced her debut as the new hero MT. Lady. Izuku had already taken his notebook out of his school bag to take notes. He started mumbling as he wrote. Gigantification was an amazing quirk, and she would certainly become a popular hero, but she would cause a lot of damage to the city. She had already destroyed part of the road where the villain she took down crashed, and she didn't seem to care for the consequences of her quirk, in favor of a dramatic entrance for her debut. That could have easily ended up hurting civilians, and even kill them, were they unfortunate enough to stand closer to the scene. Did she prioritize appearances over safety? Why would? Hey, wait, you're taking notes. You wanna be a hero. A man cut his train of thought. Izuku was probably mumbling again, and had heard him analyzing the new hero. That's great, you can do it. He gave Izuku a thumbs up, which made him light up. Not many people thought he could be a hero. He didn't know Izuku was quirkless, of course, but he still cherished the rare moment of bliss. Yes, I'll do my best. Since you're all third years, it's time for you to think seriously about your future. The teacher was talking about the students' careers, but Izuku wasn't paying much attention. He already knew what he wanted. So, instead, he was filling his notebook with observations about the new hero. I'll pass out handouts for your future plans now, but you're all, he paused before throwing the papers to the air, pretty much planning to go into the hero course, right? The classroom erupted to cheers. The teacher was praising the students for their amazing quirks, and supposedly scolding them for using them in class, but Izuku remained silent. He generally tried to stay as unnoticeable as possible during school. Everyone knew about his quirk status, and didn't hide their opinion on it. Sensei, don't lump us all in the same group. Kachan, his childhood friend and current bully, exclaimed. He was leaning on his chair, his legs crossed on his desk, grinning. I'm not gonna be stuck at the bottom with the rest of these rejects. That was uncalled for, Katsuki. Yeah, you should all shut up like the extras you are. Kachan exclaimed at his classmates' reactions. Oh, if I remember correctly, you want to go to UA. Hi, right, Bakugo. The teacher asked, earning surprised exclaims. UA, the national school, it was in the top 0.2% this year, you know. Their acceptance rate's always really low, too. That's exactly why you guys are just extras. Kachan dramatically jumped and stood on his desk. I aced the mock test. I'm the only one at this school who could possibly get into UA. I'll definitely surpass All Might and become the top hero. Kachan may be arrogant, but he worked really hard to achieve his dream. He and Izuku had the best grades in their class, but surpassing All Might was a bit of a stretch. Izuku had also gotten top marks on every test, too, but he was definitely not going to point it out. Oh, yeah, Midoriya wanted to go to UA too, right? He wanted to crawl into a hole and hide for the rest of his days. His teacher had just signed his death sentence. Everyone was already laughing, but he knew that once class was over, he would get the true reaction of his classmates. So, he said nothing but correcting a person saying that he wouldn't get in just by studying. After all, there were courses other than heroics in UA and Izuku was certain of his ability to get into the school. But that only made Kachan lash out and use his quirk to blow up Izuku's desk, causing him to fall from his chair. Just like always, the teacher said nothing about the blonde exploding stuff in the classroom. He had a heroic quirk, and no one would dare compromise his future as a hero. He was already dreading the moment the bell rang, and Kachan would once again call him out for his stupid unachievable dream. Izuku admired him, he really did. And he still called him a friend, even though he was starting to believe that wasn't the case anymore. Hey, Deku, his childhood nickname was one of the reasons why. It literally meant useless and unable to achieve anything. He started calling him that ever since he found out he was quirkless, after realizing it was another way to read the kanji in his name. At first, Izuku wanted to believe it was just a playful comment. But as they grew older, Kachan had incorporated his distaste for him to the name, making Izuku doubt he still used it as a friendly nickname, if he ever did. You're below the rejects. You're quirkless. How can you even stand in the same ring as me? Izuku wanted to defend himself. Tell his bully friend that he wasn't trying to compete with him, or anything. That it was his dream since he was little, and that it wouldn't hurt to try. But deep down, he knew any effort would be futile. He had already tried to explain himself, change his childhood friend's mind, and it never seemed to work. So, he remained silent. He let Kachan rant about his uselessness, each word expanding the cracks in the glass separating his childhood friend from the rest of his classmates, his bullies. Kachan was different. He was going to be a great hero, if only he didn't cause Izuku so much pain. Pain that he made sure to bury, and make himself believe it wasn't there. As the bell rang, signifying the end of classes for today, he started gathering his stuff, leaving his hero notebook for last. Before he had the chance to put it away in his backpack, someone grabbed it from his hands. Said someone was Kachan, of course. We're not done talking, Deku. Katsuki, what's that? One of his lackeys had waited for him and approached them, two others following him. Ha, hero analysis for the future. He snickered, the lackeys already laughing. Give it back. Kachan didn't give it back. Instead, he used his quirk to blow it up, and then proceeded to throw it out the window. He didn't give Izuku a chance to complain as he started one of his usual speeches. Most first-string heroes have stories about them from their school days. I want the shine. I want the shine of being able to be called the only student to make it into UA from this mediocre city junior high school. I mean, I am a perfectionist. He had the audacity to look timid about it. So anyway, he said, as he casually placed his already smoldering hand on Izuku's shoulder. Don't apply to UA, nerd. He kept his hand a little while longer, making his point, and made his way to the classroom's exit. The glass cracked a little more. He had used his quirk just enough to not sound an explosion, but it still hurt. Just like every other time he burned him. Izuku's body had more than a few starburst scars to prove it. He barely heard the lackeys commenting on his lack of response, calling him pathetic and delusional, when Kacchan's voice reached his ears. If you wanna be a hero that badly, there's a quick way to do it. Izuku didn't turn to face him. He didn't want to believe he would say what Izuku thought he would. Take a swan dive off of the roof, and pray for a quirk in your next life. And just like that, the glass shattered. Izuku turned to face his bully. He finally accepted it. Suicide baiting wasn't something a friend would do, but he was met with a snarky grin and explosions popping of Katsuki's palm. Because he was Katsuki, not Kacchan. He hadn't been Kacchan in a long, long time. And Izuku only now admitted it to himself. There was no point hoping for a friendship that hadn't been real for years. As he passed the school's koi pond, he found his notebook. It was drenched, and was littered in scorch marks. It was probably ruined, but he would try to salvage whatever he could and write a new one. His thoughts drifted to when the doctor revealed he was quirkless, his mom apologizing when he asked her if he could still be a hero. Ever since, everyone told him the same thing, over and over again. He couldn't be a hero. His mom never said those exact words, but Izuku knew that's what she believed, too. Everyone did. He had started to believe so, as well. He made his way under the bridge on the way home, when he heard someone behind him. A medium-sized invisibility cloak. A sludge-like person got out of the sewer entrance behind him and engulfed him before he had the chance to run. He felt slime enter his mouth, getting in his airway. He clawed at the villain, trying to remove the fluid entering his body, overwhelming him, his eyes filling with tears. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't breathe. Thanks for the help. You're my hero, he heard the villain say. How ironic. The first person to tell him he was a hero was the one who would end his life. So, this is how I die, he thought. There was a gush of wind, and he swore he saw the frame of his favorite hero right before passing out. The next thing he knew, he was gently being slapped in the face. Oh, good. I'm glad you're okay, Izuku screeched. It really was All Might. And he was screaming like he saw a ghost. Way to go, Izuku. Sorry about getting you caught up in my villain fighting. I don't usually make mistakes like this, but I was in high spirits on my day off in a new place. The hero's smile didn't falter as he explained. But you were a big help. Thanks. All Might was thanking him. What the heck? There was no way this was happening. He must be dreaming. I captured him safely. All Might held 2 plastic bottles with slime in it. He had apparently caught the villain with whatever he had in hand. Izuku was still getting his head around meeting his hero, and reached for his notebook that he dropped when the villain attacked him, but it was already signed. He didn't expect any less from the number 1 hero, and bowed, thanking him profusely, before a thought crossed his mind. All Might was getting ready to leave and take the villain to the police, and Izuku started to ask his question. But before he could utter a word, the hero had crouched and activated his quirk, ready to jump, and without thinking, he grabbed the hero's leg as he took off in the air. Hey. Let go of me. All Might started pushing him off of him, but Izuku held tight. If I let go now, I'll die. That's true. I have something to ask you directly. He tried to say, and thankfully the hero understood. He landed on a nearby rooftop, and he already started to leave, leaving Izuku to gather himself, muttering about being out of time, when Izuku called after him. Wait, I wanted to ask you, even if I don't have a quirk, can I become a hero? No one thought he could. He barely believed it himself. But maybe, if his hero told him his dream was possible, it wouldn't be just a dream anymore. His meeting with All Might, at the time, he couldn't even imagine how much it would change his fate. If only it was for the better. Because, with a single sentence, All Might shattered his dreams, and broke the dam that was holding his faith in the hero world. Chapter text. Can someone without a quirk be like you? Izuku pinned his eyes to the ground as waited for the hero's answer. Without a quirk, huh? Izuku was mumbling about always being made fun of because of his lack of quirk, but he always thought that saving people with a fearless smile was really cool. As he glanced up to look at the number 1 hero, his eyes widened at the sight before him. In a cloud of smoke, the hero had disappeared, a skeletal version of him taking his place. Izuku couldn't hold back a scream of surprise. Why you're deflating. But this couldn't be All Might. This man was so skinny. He must be a fake. Izuku looked around, trying to find the real hero. I am All Might, the man said before spewing blood out of his mouth. No way. Izuku screamed again. All Might is fearless. He saves everyone with a smile. The man sighed. A fearless smile, huh? He sat on the ground before explaining his grave injury 5 years ago, from a fight that almost cost him his life. How he could only work as a hero for 3 hours a day. How he asked the incident not to be made public. I will save people with a smile. The symbol of peace cannot be daunted by evil. He clenched his hand into a fist. I smile to show the pressure of heroes, and to trick the fear inside me. So, heroes aren't invincible, after all. Izuku knew that, but he never expected the symbol of peace, the supposedly invincible hero, to mask his weakness and pretend he was the hero everyone knew and respected. That Izuku looked up to. He felt pity for the hero. He imagined the pressure of being the symbol of peace while hiding such a weakness was bound to break his spirit, and make him suppress his own fear of failure. Still, he had lied to the whole world, and made himself appear as this flawless protector, put on a fake smile and spread the misconception that everything was sunshine and rainbows just because he didn't want to admit to himself that he was weak. Izuku finally understood that heroes weren't so perfect and admirable as society deemed them to be. As the heroes presented themselves to be. Pros are always risking their lives. I cannot simply say, you can be hero without power. With those words, his appreciation for the hero evaporated. Any high regard that remained after everything Izuku just learned, turned to dust, along with his dream to be a hero. They were instead replaced by disappointment and something close to resentment. I see. All Might stood up and started walking away, blissfully unaware he just shattered a 14-year-old's dream. If you want to help others, then you could also become a police officer. They're often teased because they get villains delivered to their doorstep, but that is also a fine occupation. He stopped as he opened the rooftop's door. It's not bad to dream, but you also have to consider what's realistic, shonen. Those were his last words to Izuku as he closed the door, leaving him alone on the rooftop. Before Izuku could process the fact that a hero just left a child, and a victim of a villain attack just minutes before, alone on a rooftop after telling him to be realistic, he heard a loud bang a few blocks over. He instinctively ran to the exit, wondering what hero would arrive at the scene, before All Might's words echoed in his head. I cannot simply say, you can be a hero even without power. He slowed down to a walk, and made his way out of the building. He walked towards his apartment, his scorched notebook in his hands. He started to leaf through the pages, reaching his newest entry on Mount Lady, and All Might's autograph, while the words of his teacher and classmates played in his mind. He still can't face reality, even though he's already a 3rd year in junior high. It's time for you to think seriously about your future. You also have to consider what's realistic. All Might's advice really stuck with him. Whoever said, never meet your heroes, was absolutely right. Izuku almost wanted to have remained blissfully unaware of the faults of the hero world. Almost. He was surprised to notice he hadn't cried at all, after his dreams were crushed. For the crybaby he had been since he was born, it was strange that he hadn't shed a single tear today. It was nice, being in control of his emotions for once. He supposed this entire experience had actually benefited him in some way. He contemplated the reality of the hero society, how broken it was. His mind wandered on details he had gathered and chose to overlook, the fanboy he was. Used to be. Endeavor, for example, he was the number 2 hero, and yet had the highest kill-to-capture ratio in the whole country. There was also an old news report stating his eldest son had burned up in a quirk accident, but no details were ever revealed. The Hero Commission had covered the whole incident up and it was never talked about again. The HSPC was sweeping under the carpet secrets they didn't want the public to know. Like All Might's injury, the hero hadn't said so, but there was no way they didn't know about it. Izuku wondered what else the commission had been concealing to keep up their facade of their perfect little system, with their perfect little heroes. Izuku then had a thought he never imagined he would think of. If his dream to become a hero was impossible, and the system is as defective as he was sure to find proof of if he dug a little deeper, then he would try to change it instead. His thoughts were interrupted by nearby screams. He noticed smoke and explosions sounding from where he heard the villain attack earlier. He had walked towards the scene without even thinking about it. His fanboy habits would die hard, he figured. Still, he was curious, so he made his way through the crowd to the front, to get a better view of what was happening. The place had caught fire, and there were a handful of heroes in the area, trying to put out the flames and keep away the civilians. That's when he noticed the sludge villain that almost killed him earlier. Hadn't All Might captured him? Did they get away? Oh, no. Did All Might drop him when Izuku had clung to his leg? In that case, this was Izuku's fault, wasn't it? But, wait, why weren't the heroes doing anything? There were so many of them there. Mount Lady, Death Arms, Kamui Woods, why weren't they attacking the villain? His questions were answered when he heard a civilian saying the villain had caught a middle schooler, and that it's been like this for a while. What the heck? All the more reason for the heroes to rush in and help them. They were definitely suffocating, just like Izuku was a while ago. Wait, All Might would have definitely arrived at the scene before Izuku. Where was he? Why wasn't he doing anything? Izuku looked through the crowd and spotted the hero in the back, in his skinny form, watching the scene with horror. Izuku was filled with anger. He was just standing there, doing nothing. Why? Because he wouldn't be able to keep his buff form for long. He was letting a kid suffocate, just to protect his secret. The guilt over the villain getting away was overshadowed by anger and disdain. An innocent person would die, just to keep up the facade of the invincible symbol of peace. How dare he? How dare the heroes not even try to do something, anything? Pathetic. They were all pathetic. He was looking around, hoping maybe someone would step in, when he caught the victim's eyes. Red eyes, wide with fear, were looking back at him. And he recognized them. Of course he did, he would recognize those piercing crimson irises anywhere. Without any hesitation, he was already running towards Katsuki. He couldn't just sit there and do nothing, like All Might was doing. He wasn't like any of those heroes present. Said heroes were shouting at him to stop, but he didn't listen. He wouldn't let his childhood friend die. They may not be friends anymore, and Katsuki may be his bully, but right now he was a victim, in need of rescue. And Izuku was going to help him, any way he could. His mind ran 1,000 miles per hour trying to find a way to free Katsuki from the villain's grasp. He mentally skimmed through his 13 notebooks worth of information about heroes as he ran. The villain's eyes locked on his own. His eyes. They were the only solid part of his body, so Izuku took his school bag and threw it at the sludge with all his might. In hindsight, it wasn't a lot, but it was enough to hit his target and loosen the grasp he had on Katsuki enough so the boy could breathe. As he gasped for air, Izuku started clawing at the villain, trying to remove any amount of sludge to reach the blonde and free him. "Why are you here?" he said in between coughs. "My legs moved on their own. You looked like you needed help, and I couldn't stand there and watch while the heroes did nothing." Izuku shouted, before a powerful gush of wind blew from behind him. "I really am pathetic." All Might was then standing in front of him. "Even though I admonished you, I wasn't putting what I said into practice." "No, you weren't." He grabbed Katsuki's arm that had managed to get free from the sludge. "Pros are always risking their lives. Only after a middle schooler runs to save another, risking his life while you did nothing, apparently." Detroit smash. All Might punched the air with such force, it blew the villain away from Katsuki, whom he was holding tight. The silence that followed was interrupted with the sound of raindrops falling. The wind pressure must have been so high, it created an updraft, forming clouds that poured a significant amount of rain. Izuku was still amazed, despite his disdain. But he was almost too late. And he would be if Izuku hadn't stepped in. But no one acknowledged his part. Instead, the crowd started praising All Might and how amazing he was. They received his signature smile, and journalists started surrounding him, asking questions and taking pictures. While the heroes collected the scattered sludge, and safely delivered it to the police, Izuku was getting scolded by Death Arms and Kamui Woods. Geez, there's a limit to how rash you can be. There was absolutely no reason for you to put yourself in danger. There was every reason to do so. The heroes were doing nothing. Instead of voicing his thoughts, Izuku stayed silent. He glanced at Katsuki, where other heroes were praising him. What the word felt foreign. Even in his head, he wasn't accustomed to cursing, but was describing his thoughts accurately. That was amazing toughness. And that quirk, seriously, Katsuki should be getting scolded, too. Yes, he was trying to escape, but with his explosions he had lit the whole street on fire, and could have easily hurt someone. Why was only Izuku getting reprimanded? Was it because he didn't use a quirk? Because he was quirkless? Why was he even asking? Of course it was. As if he needed more confirmation that he would never be a hero. Not that he wanted to, anymore. Once you're a pro, please come to my agency. You'll definitely be an excellent sidekick. As if Katsuki would settle with being a sidekick. Speaking of, he was now looking at Izuku with a weird expression on his face, a mixture of anger, embarrassment and something else Izuku couldn't put his finger on. As Izuku walked home, he heard his terrible nickname from behind him. Deku. He turned around, and he saw Katsuki running towards him. After he stopped in front of him, and caught his breath, he clenched his fists. I never asked you for help. Izuku mentally rolled his eyes. Sure, you didn't. And you didn't help me. Got it. He was now shouting at Izuku, who stood there with a neutral expression on his face. I was fine by myself. Sure, you're a quirkless failure playing without a full deck. Don't think you can look down on me. Are you trying to make me owe you? Don't look down on me. You damn nerd. Before Izuku had the chance to respond, he turned around and walked away. Izuku frowned. Look down on you. I never. Oh, he thought. So that's what it was. The blonde always acted so full of himself, but now he understood. Katsuki was masking an inferiority complex with tough words and violence, and used Izuku's quirklessness as an excuse. Well, that's ironic. Izuku was always looking up to Kachan, since they were kids. Even when he started hurting him with his words, and his quirk, he still thought Katsuki had the potential to be a great hero, and he aspired to be like him. Not anymore, though. Izuku was even starting to doubt Katsuki's ability to be a hero. When he finally accepted that his childhood friend had turned into his bully. Wow, that was a few hours ago, so much had happened, it seemed like an eternity ago. He was starting to think that if he continued behaving this way, not only to Izuku, but to anyone, how could he be considered heroic? Just because he had a cool quirk. That wouldn't be enough in the long run. Then again, Izuku had lost his admiration for heroes, so it didn't really matter. If he made it, he would just be another piece of the Hero Commission's puzzle of dishonesty and corruption. Just as he was about to turn around and head home, he heard the familiar booming voice for the millionth time that day. I am here. All Might appeared in his buff form, running towards Izuku. All Might, what are you doing here? You were surrounded by reporters until just now. The hero laughed. Getting away from them was a piece of cake. Why? He flexed his muscles in a dramatic pose. Izuku mentally rolled his eyes. He was kinda surprised to see how quickly his enthusiasm for the man had dissipated. Because I am All Might. Before he could finish his sentence, he deflated into his skinny form, blood spewing out of his mouth. After he cleaned after himself, he took a serious expression. Shonen, I come with thanks, a correction, and a suggestion. What? Even if Izuku was intrigued, he was fairly sure he didn't want to speak to the hero ever again. If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't told me about your life, I would have turned into a guy in a bodysuit who was all talk. What was he talking about? Thank you. Oh no, please don't. It was my fault in the first place. Izuku was feeling like scolding the man, but instead, he decided to continue playing the part of the little helpless kid with zero self-esteem. The last part wasn't a lie, but if he was going to change the broken hero system, he could use the cover of a fragile middle schooler. He only had to pretty much act like he would before his whole world came crushing down. I got in the way of your work, and I said all those impertinent things even though I'm quirkless. He kept his gaze downwards and held the straps of his backpack. That's right. Thanks. That's so kind of you. It was because it was none other than the timid, quirkless you at the scene that I was able to act. Glad to be of service. Wait, what? Izuku looked at All Might with a surprised expression on his face. Top heroes have stories about them from their school days. Most of the stories have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. Wait, Izuku thought, is this going where I think it is? His eyes started watering for the first time today. For some reason, he remembered his mother's apologies when he had asked her if he could be a hero. That was true for you, too, wasn't it? Yeah, he managed to get out. He was full on crying, and cursed his tear ducts for once again working excessively without his permission. That's not it, Mom, he thought. Back then, what I wanted you to say, the words I wanted to hear were, "You can become a hero." Even though he had decided that wasn't what he wanted anymore, hearing those words, the words that he longed all his life to hear, felt like a stab in the gut. When he had finally given up on his former dream, his childhood hero was hurting him in a way he never thought possible. He cried with frustration and pain, that he hopefully passed off as happiness and relief. He felt as if the hero was trying to apply duct tape to the dam that he had broken, but was unaware he was too late. The water had already gotten through, and Izuku's respect had drowned along with his ambitions and faith. In another universe, maybe this was a dream becoming reality. But for Izuku, here and now, it was one of the most painful moments in his life. By the way, this is the story of how he became the greatest villain. Chapter text. You are worthy to inherit my power. Izuku looked up to the hero. His surprise cut his sobs like a knife. Inherit your power. All Might burst into laughter. What's with that face? It's just a suggestion. The real show starts after this. He walked closer to the boy. Listen, Shonen, you need to decide whether or not you will accept my power, he exclaimed, pointing a finger at Izuku, as he started spouting blood again. What power? What is he talking about? I'm talking about my quirk, Shonen, All Might said, as if reading his thoughts. The tabloids called it superhuman strength, and a boost, and I constantly dodged the question during interviews with a funny joke. That's right, Izuku already knew that. He had spent quite some time trying to figure out his quirk, but in the end, it didn't really matter to him. And now, it looked like he was going to get an answer. Because the symbol of peace, All Might, had to be a natural-born hero. Bullshit, Izuku called. Wow, he was on a roll with cursing today. But, Shonen, I will tell you the truth. The hero dramatically opened his arms and looked at the sky. My quirk was passed on to me like a sacred torch. What? It was passed on to you. That's right. And next, it is your turn. He was still looking at the sky for some reason. Wait a minute, it's true that your quirk is something hotly debated as one of the world's greatest mysteries. So much that not a day goes by when I don't see someone talking about it online. But, well, I don't really understand what you mean by inheriting or passing on a quirk. Izuku had entered mumbling mode. I've never heard of anything like that before, and it's never even been conjectured in the debate. Why is that? Is it because since the dawn of history, a quirk like that was never confirmed? You always start with denial, All Might cut him off. Nonsense. What? I may hide a lot of things, but I don't lie. The power to transfer power, that is the quirk I inherited. How? Why? Where did super strength come from, then? Does it stack the power of all the previous holders, making each successor more powerful? Izuku had so many questions. His obsession with analyzing quirks and curiosity were getting the better of him. I was crowned with one for all. One for all. That's right. One person cultivates the power, and passes it on to another person, who also cultivates it and passes it on. It is the crystallization of power that spins together the voices of those who need help, with a courageous heart. Well, that sounds a bit dramatic, in Izuku's humble opinion. He also thought it was stupid, keeping his quirk such a mystery. He could just say he has enhanced strength and durability or something. It's like he wanted people to look more into it. That would just make it more likely for this information to fall on the wrong hands. Speaking of, does the hero make a habit of talking about his greatest secrets to random people, or was it his first time? If it was, he was doing fantastic. Why do you want to give me something so great? And more importantly, who gives one of the most powerful quirks in history, that can apparently be transferred? He would have to look into that, to a random 14-year-old who they just met, and don't even know their name. That was so irresponsible. I have been looking for a successor. And then, I thought it would be all right for you to inherit it. Oh, so, that's how it was. He was offering Izuku his quirk, so he can be his successor. A hero, which means, he thought he could be a hero, but only if he got some super strong quirk like his own. Because Izuku, as he was, quirkless and weak, wasn't enough. Also, All Might has been looking for a successor, and he chose a random kid he found who, after he crushed his dreams and left him alone on a rooftop, did his job for him, and offered him a quirk as a pathetic excuse for an apology. You are just a quirkless hero fanboy, thanks for the info, but you were more heroic than anyone else back there. Izuku didn't agree. He didn't do it to be heroic. He saw no one was helping and took initiative. It was just common sense. Someone had to do something, and he couldn't just stand there and watch. All Might said that word again, though. He thought Izuku had a hero's heart. But he wasn't good enough. Not as he was, and he never would be. Anyway, it's up to you. The man rubbed the back of his head. What will you do? Did he really expect someone to take right then and there such an important decision? It seemed such a spontaneous decision in All Might's part. Izuku wanted to slap his forehead. And he still hadn't asked Izuku his name. Not that it mattered. He didn't want to be hero anymore. He wouldn't need a quirk to achieve his dreams. He was about to decline, when a thought popped into his head. What if, in his efforts to bring down the hero society, he had one of the most powerful quirks ever recorded? Quirks were tools, after all. It would be a great addition in his arsenal against the system. And the irony, using the number one hero's quirk against the heroes. Oh, that was perfect. He hid the feral grin that tried to form on his lips, and instead forced his face to make the most determined expression possible. I'll do it. An immediate reply. That's what I thought you'd say. Of course he did. Hey. This is such a comfy fridge to sit on. If only you could move it even a little. Well, I mean, you weigh 274 kilograms, right? Izuku looked at the hero in exasperation from the ground. No. I lost weight, so I'm only 255 kilograms now, in this form. Izuku sighed. Anyway, why am I dragging trash at the beach park? It was 5 a.m., 2 days after Izuku accepted to inherit the hero's quirk. All Might had brought him to Dagoba Beach Park, that was more of a trash dump than a beach. It had been like this for at least a few years, apparently. Because of the sea currents, objects drifted there a lot, and people took advantage of that to hide their illegal dumping, resulting in mountains of trash. All Might thought it was the perfect training for him. He explained that One for All is the fullest physical ability of many people gathered into one, so an unprepared body could not inherit it fully. Izuku, small and weak as he was, would not be able to withstand the quirk's power, and his body would explode. So first, he would need to train his body to be able to handle the quirk. He wondered if All Might had to go through a similar training or if he was already able to receive it. The number one hero added that wasn't the only reason they would be cleaning up the beach. He said that heroes these days were all after the showy stuff. Shocking, when originally, being a hero meant doing volunteer service. So, cleaning the beach to its former glory would be the perfect first step to becoming a hero. Even though Izuku wasn't interested in showing the world what a wonderful and selfless hero in the making he was, he did wonder what the coast would look like without all the rubbish that had built up over the years. For some reason, Before he explained all this, the hero sat on a fridge and ordered Izuku to drag it across the beach, to the truck he had gotten to transport all the trash away. The boy thought it would be counterproductive, trying to drag such heavy weights on the first day of training. He hoped it was just to show him what he would end up being able to do, towards the end of the 10 months leading up to the UA entrance exams. Midoriya Shonen, he had finally asked his name. You want to go to UA, right? Time to put on his fanboy persona. Yes, because that's where you went. So, if I'm going to go to a hero school, he smiled softly, as if he couldn't wait to follow the hero's footsteps. I thought it would definitely have to be UA. You really are a fanboy. The man laughed. But I've told you this before. It's not something you can do without a quirk. It's sad, but that is what the reality is. Gee, thanks for reminding me, Izuku thought. As if it didn't break my spirits the first time you told me. UA is the hardest hero course to get into, All Might continued. In other words, I have to complete my vessel until the entrance exam, Izuku concluded. That's where these come in. He held a stack of papers in his hand. Where was he hiding those? He called it his aim to pass, American Dream Plan. In other words, a training plan, meal plans and sleep schedule included, for Izuku to follow, so he can get his body ready for receiving his quirk in time. Izuku would have to make a few adjustments, and overall, as he skimmed through it, it seemed really hard, but not impossible. A genuine smile formed on his lips. He finally was working towards an achievable goal. It wasn't his real one, getting in the prestigious school, but it was a great first step towards his ultimate goal. He didn't have a specific plan for overthrowing the system yet, but that could wait. Getting his hands on the symbol of peace's quirk was a solid first stepping stone. And so, his 10 months of hell began. He started with cleaning the beach, one piece of garbage at a time. Contrary to All Might's plan, he didn't begin with random heavy objects, but worked his way through, from small trash, to old tires, to boxes and containers, to electrical devices, and so on. Sometimes, he really wanted to shoot All Might with a bazooka. Like when he told him to push a whole car during his first month of training. Or, when he would kindly remind him that he would never pass the exams if he went on like this being falling to the ground from exhaustion a few times, or shouting at him when he couldn't lift weights too heavy for that particular part of his regime. It was great exercise for honing his acting skills. Even when he wanted to shout at the hero for breaking him, when he wanted to scream his guts out every time he reminded him how his quirklessness was a temporary handicap, and basically any time he wanted to hit his face with the perfectly fine frying pan he found at the beach one day, he kept his soft, goofy and loving expression on his face. He would keep up his hero fanboy facade, an aspiring hero in the making, and not a manipulator who just wanted to steal a powerful quirk and slither his way into the very hero society he wanted to bring down. It seemed to work. His mom didn't seem to notice any difference in his behavior, apart from his constant tiredness, and his requests for training equipment and martial arts lessons. At first, he thought beginning any other type of training would make him collapse during the first few months. Since the hero was only preparing his body, however, he would end up going to the entrance exam bulked up, but with no fighting experience whatsoever, and a quirk he would have no time to learn how to use. So, he signed up for classes that would teach him close combat, both evasion, defense and striking techniques, as well as using some kind of weapon, since he won't be able to use his quirk frequently while his body adjusts. His weapon of choice was a staff. He was also inclined to use knives, but that could wait until after the exam, when he wouldn't have a deadline that his literal future and new purpose depended on. His training also included swimming laps on the beach, lifting weights, running figurative and literal marathons. He had scheduled almost everything, so he didn't overwork himself, but would consistently level up the difficulty in everything he did, and balance his training with All Might and his Aikido classes. One time, he made the mistake of working on his schedule during class. He ended up mumbling for a few minutes before he got hit on the head by his teacher for disturbing the class, hard enough to bang his head on his desk. That was literal child abuse, but he was quirkless, so he couldn't say anything, or he would get in trouble. Instead, he ignored the teacher's joke, about his encounter with the sludge villain making him go crazy and delusional about making it to UA, as well as his classmates' laughter and mean comments. He just kept a neutral expression on his face and apologized for the noise before returning to his notes, surprising his class. Katsuki wasn't one of the kids making fun of him, though. He had turned quiet after the sludge villain incident, and Izuku would often catch him silently watching him, with a somehow softer version of his usual scowl. Katsuki seemed to be getting irritated at his new apathetic demeanor during school, or maybe the lack of his usual whimpering and nervousness, Izuku wasn't sure. In any case, he would just scoff at his lackey's stupid jokes, to which Izuku had mastered the art of not giving a and would either completely ignore them, or occasionally deadpan at them, which always shut them up. It was almost funny to watch. During the summer break, he had gained a significant amount of muscle mass, enough to be noticeable under his summer school uniform. On the first day back to school, Katsuki cornered him during lunch break, during which he was usually left alone. Deku. He walked up to his desk, usual scowl in place, his lackeys right behind him, as Izuku took out his bento box. He had also done extensive research about his diet, and his mom, seeing him determined, had agreed to help him, cooking for him according to his meal plans. Izuku looked up as his childhood friend leaned over his desk. He waited for him to begin his rant or whatever he wanted, a neutral expression on his face. "What? You think you're too high and mighty to answer me, nerd?" Izuku wanted to wipe off that stupid grin off of his face with a cheese grater. Instead, he sighed and spoke calmly. "What do you want, Katsuki?" He almost laughed at their baffled expressions. He hadn't called Katsuki by his name in years. It was hilarious how the blonde almost didn't realize he was referring to him. His confused expression turned into an angry scowl. He grabbed Izuku by his shirt and brought him closer to himself, ruby eyes staring into emerald ones. It was almost like he was trying to break through his masquerade, decipher a puzzle that seemed impossible to solve. "What, do you think you're better than me? You look less like a twig and you think you can be a hero now, or something, huh? You're nothing, Deku. You'll never surpass me." He unclenched his fist and jabbed at Izuku with his fingers as he made his point. "You will always be a weak, quirkless loser. You'll never be better than me." Izuku sighed again. "You know, not everything is about you, Katsuki." He took advantage of his classmate's stunned reaction to push away the hand in front of him. He gathered his stuff and hung his new dark green backpack on one shoulder, his bento in his hands. Katsuki was obviously trying, and failing, to find something to say, opening and closing his mouth like a fish. A snort almost escaped Izuku's lips. "Excuse me," he said as he got past the other boys and made his way to the roof, so he could eat his lunch in peace. As the entrance exam date grew closer and closer, Izuku got increasingly stronger and more confident in his combat skills. He was a quick learner, and he became steadily more dexterous with his staff. On February 25th, the day before the exam, he took his last trip to the beach. He had already cleared the part of the coast All Might had instructed a couple of weeks ago, but wanted to finish what he started. He stayed up until 1 a.m., leaving a couple trash for tomorrow. He had agreed to meet All Might there, 6 a.m. sharp, so he could receive his prize for his hard work, and he wanted to get a good night's rest. He couldn't afford messing up. Dagoba Beach was completely cleared before sunrise. There wasn't even a speck of dust left. Izuku felt proud of himself. Not only for that, but for everything he had achieved over the last 10 months. And he would make sure they paid off. He was sitting on top of the last pile of trash he had made the last few days, admiring his work, when he heard All Might's footsteps behind him. He didn't turn to greet him, instead he closed his eyes and felt the breeze on his face. After a long time, he felt peaceful. All Might audibly gasped. "He even cleaned outside of where I told him to. He finished at the last minute. More than perfectly." Izuku, instead of replying, jumped down from the trash pile and onto the sand. "Oh my goodness," the hero exclaimed in English, turning into his buff form at the last word. Izuku mentally rolled his eyes. His lips curled up into a small smile, almost genuine. "All Might, I did it. Yeah, you surprised me, you entertainer. Teenagers are amazing, he said, whatever that meant. Here, take a look. He brought his phone to Izuku's face. He was showing him a picture he had taken on the first day of training. Wow, he really looked different. He had doubled in size, and grown a few centimeters taller, too. You did good, you really did. Izuku didn't really care for the hero's approval, but he was still proud of himself. The mirage of it is finally just barely visible, but you have certainly become a suitable vessel. Izuku supposed this should be a heartwarming moment, so he shed a few tears and mumbled about how blessed he felt. We'll have to fix those leaky eyes of yours, he said, patting him on the back. Izuku had already fixed that, if it meant being in control of his emotions and the way he chose to express them. As if proving it to himself, he wiped his fake tears and gave the hero a warm smile. He found it so irritating, how All Might would say such things, insulting him for everything he used to be, and still presented himself as, with the same smile that he saved people. Like he had saved Izuku. But no one had saved him. He had saved himself. He had pulled himself away from the charade they called the Hero Society, and could finally see the world as it truly was. Now, it's time for the award ceremony, Midoriya Izuku. Yes, sir. All Might plucked a hair from his head and held it in front of him. This is something I once said. Something that you receive because you're lucky, and something that you were given because you were recognized or different in essence. Take that to heart. This is the power that you earned because of your own effort. Izuku pretended to be inspired by his speech, and braced himself to receive one of the world's strongest quirks, while All Might held the strand of hair in front of Izuku. Eat this. Huh. Chapter text. It doesn't really matter what it is, as long as you take my DNA. All Might rubbed the back of his head, his demeanor far different from his "I'm giving an important inspiring speech" act, just a few seconds ago. What, now? There's no time. You'll be late for the exam. He seemed ready to start chasing Izuku if he fled from the situation or something. Wait, why a hair? Isn't a drop of blood or saliva enough? Well, yes, I'll go with blood, then. The idea of trying to swallow a hair and it getting stuck in his throat made him shiver. As he approached the UA high school entrance exam location, he let his mind wander. In the end, he didn't have time to test out his new power. He had managed to convince the hero to pinch his finger and give him a drop of his blood, thankfully. He wasn't feeling any different, though. He started doubting he even received it. All Might had said it would take 2 to 3 hours to start feeling something. He also noted that since its vessel was made in a hurry, when he used it, he should be prepared for the physical repercussions it would have on his body. He would find out later, he figured. Out of my way, Deku. The familiar voice sounded from behind him. I'm not even close to you, asshole. Don't stand in front of me. I'll kill you. Katsuki didn't even stop as he passed by him and went inside the building. Weirdly enough, apart from that one time after summer break, he hadn't done anything to him since the sludge villain. Sure, good luck, Katsuki, he said, not expecting a response, and followed him inside. As he made his first step, however, he tripped over his feet. Oh, me. He was holding his backpack's straps with his hands, and he wouldn't manage to stop his fall in time. Instead of falling on his face, however, he found himself floating above the ground. Huh. Are you all right? A sweet voice sounded next to him. A pretty girl with short brown hair and pink cheeks smiled at him. She set him straight and touched her fingers together. 5-point activation quirk. It's my quirk. Sorry for using it without asking first. But it'd be bad luck if you fell, right? She gave him a cute smile that would have probably made him trip over his words, if he could even speak at all. Was he attracted to girls? He gave her a polite smile in return. You're right, thank you. You're welcome. Aren't you nervous? Haha. Yeah, he really was nervous, and he actually made it seem like it, too. Let's do our best. See ya. She waved at him and jogged inside. He followed, making sure not to trip again. He passed the written portion of the exam with flying colors. He was beyond prepared, having aced the mock tests more than a year before. The last question on the test was to write a small essay on why they chose to be heroes. He barely kept a snort when he read it. He bullshitted his way through, and ended up writing one of the most inspiring speeches he had ever heard, if he said so himself. He was done before everyone else, and even had half an hour to spare, so he went through all his answers one more time, handed his papers and took a stroll before it was time for the hero course applicants to gather in the exam orientation room for the practical exam. After everyone was seated, Izuku and Katsuki were placed next to each other. Since they were from the same middle school, the overhead lights turned on, and Present Mic began the introduction. For all you examinee listeners tuning in, welcome to my show today. Everybody say, hey. No one responded, resulting in an awkward silence. What a refined response. Mike resumed his dramatic mannerisms. Then I'll quickly present to you the rundown on the practical exam. Are you ready? Yeah. Once again, silence ensued. Izuku, a year ago, would have freaked out over meeting the voice hero, never mind all the teachers at UA being pro-heroes. As he was, though, he watched the hero explain the rules of the practical exam with a neutral expression, while feeling Katsuki's piercing gaze on him. The exam consisted of a 10-minute mock urban battle. Each person had on their application card the battle center they were assigned. In other words, they won't let you work with your friends, huh? Katsuki surprised Izuku when he pointed out they were stationed in different test locations. Friends. Izuku hummed instead of providing a response. They were all free to bring whatever items they wanted. Izuku had brought his steel staff with him, which was retractable and could fit in his backpack. His sensei at the martial arts center had gifted it to him, after seeing all his hard work and resolve, along with its case that he would hang on his back. He had submitted his weapon along with his application a couple months ago, just to be safe, and got it approved. Mike proceeded to presenting the different types of foe villains, robots and the point system. Your goal, dear listeners, is to use your quirks to earn points by immobilizing the foe villains. Use your quirks, huh? That was just plain quirk discrimination. What about quirkless people, or people with a non-combat type of quirk? They would be at a huge disadvantage. Izuku figured, since the exam was battle-oriented, there should be another way of awarding points, like from helping people. If not, he would be even more disappointed in the system, and the bar was already below the ground. He didn't have his hopes up, but he would still help whoever needed it. Of course, attacking other examinees and any other unheroic actions are prohibited. Mike pointed out. You hear that, Katsuki? Attacking other people is unheroic. Get that through that thick skull of yours. Izuku glared at his childhood friend, as if trying to telepathically get his message through. A hand shot up from the crowd, accompanied by a loud and stern voice. May I ask a question? After being given the okay by Mike, the tall, blue-haired boy pointed his leaflet with details about the exam. On this printout, there are 4 types of villains. If that is a misprint, then UA, the most prominent school in Japan, should be ashamed of that foolish mistake. Dude, chill, Izuku thought. It's obviously not a mistake. We examinees are here in this place because we wish to be molded into exemplary heroes. Izuku held back a snort. Sure. Subtle laughter echoed in the room. Okay, examinee number 7111. How the heck did he know his number? Had he memorized everyone's ID? Impressive. Thanks for the great message, Present Mike continued. He provided a summary about the 0-pointer, and the boy thanked him with a deep bow. He was so stiff, almost like a robot. The voice hero closed his presentation with a quote a hero had said, that Izuku didn't bother listening to, before shouting UA's catchphrase. Go beyond, plus ultra. A small bus brought Izuku and other examinees to Battle Center B, after leading them to the changing rooms to put on their gym clothes. Izuku put his staff in its case on his back, and waited for Mike's signal to charge into the testing grounds. Among the students waiting with him, he spotted the nice girl who stopped his fall with her quirk, as well as the stiff dude from before. He had a feeling he would be seeing them often from now on. As soon as Mike said, "Okay, start," Izuku was running inside the testing grounds. It wasn't easy to get points. Izuku didn't have much experience with his weapon, and certainly not with a quirk, unlike every participant there. Still, he did his best to destroy the robots he found with his steel staff, and helped every person he thought was in danger or injured. He couldn't do much without a first aid kit, but he knew enough tricks, spending most of his childhood being physically abused and all. After Mike's voice announced the 8-minute mark, at which point Izuku had counted 20 villain points. As he turned to a main street from the alley where he was catching his breath, the ground started shaking, and explosions sounded, not far from where he was. A gigantic robot appeared, that he recognized as the zero-pointer. Recalling Mike's advice, he joined the other kids in the area running away from it. Before he could get too far, he heard a pained scream, and turned around instinctively. When he recognized the kind girl who helped him just hours before, he was running before he could even think about it. His mind conjured up the moment he rushed towards Katsuki, when he was captured by the sludge villain. While it seemed ages ago, even after all his hard work, he still ran towards danger, in aid of another. He was no hero, not then, and certainly not now. But he wasn't going to let that girl get crushed by a huge robot because the school didn't care to make the exam safe enough, so no one got seriously hurt. As he approached the zero-pointer, he felt a surge of power running through his legs. He had instinctively activated his quirk, and the next thing he knew, he was up in the air, facing the robot with his right fist pulled back, his legs screaming in pain. He focused his quirk's power on his arm, ready to punch the foe villain. He recalled All Might's advice for when he would use his quirk. Squeeze your S, and yell this inside your heart. Smash. Yeah, no, I'm not doing that, thanks. Instead, he let out a cry. He was in pain, and scared and his fist made contact, causing the robot to fall back with incredible force, similar to the hero's power, and explode. As he plummeted towards the ground, he realized he had 2 broken legs and a shattered right arm. Using All Might's quirk should be able to help him land without dying, but right now his legs were dangling like cooked noodles. So those are the repercussions the hero was talking about. Well, that ing-s. He was starting to freak out. He didn't know what to do to avoid getting squashed to the ground, and he had only one working limb. Wait, if he used a Detroit Smash, he had to come up with his own names for his moves, and aimed it downwards. He would have to get the timing right, or he would literally die. He drew his left fist back, and as he was about to activate One for All, he felt a slap on his face, and he stopped falling just above the ground. He heard a weak release, before closing the distance with the asphalt, landing on his face. He barely heard the girl who just saved his life, and spared him from another shattered arm, throwing up a few meters behind him. Present Mike announcing, "Time's up," was the last thing he heard before he passed out from the pain. It was a week later, and he still hadn't received a letter from UA. Izuku wouldn't say he was getting nervous, but he was a little restless, wanting to know the results of the exam. Recovery Girl had come to the exam grounds once it was over, checking the kids for any injuries. She used her quirk on Izuku, and he regained consciousness shortly after. He had received an earful for being so careless, but he felt too tired to actually listen. He headed home and fell into a mini coma. He still went to school the next day. He didn't want to worry his mom too much. All Might hadn't contacted him at all since then. Not that he was going to complain, but it was kinda weird. He thought he would at least ask him how he went, though, or congratulate him or something. He was currently sitting in the living room, casually lifting weights with his right hand and scrolling through social media with his left, when his mom entered the room calling his name frantically. "Izuku, it's here." "It came," she shrieked, showing him a white envelope with a red stamp of the school's insignia on it. He played the part of an overly anxious applicant who was about to find out whether he got in his dream school, and took the heavy envelope to his room. Inside it was a small disc that started projecting a hologram as soon as it got placed on his desk. He was greeted with All Might's face, who declared loudly, "I am here as a projection." Izuku groaned. Why him of all heroes? Wait, what does he have to do with UA? I had to do some paperwork that took some time, so I couldn't contact you. I'm sorry. Oh no, the tragedy. The hero proceeded to explain he was the newest faculty member of UA God Ing Dammit, and started to say something before someone behind the camera told him to wrap it up. Couldn't he just tell him up close? Couldn't he make a simple phone call to his Ing successor? All Might then announced how he passed the written exam with top marks, and got 20 villain points on the practical exam. 20 points would not be enough for you to pass, if that were the only points you got. I knew it, Izuku thought. The exam did award points of heroism or being selfless or whatever. If only they actually told them that, or at least insinuate it, so kids like him would not be discouraged for being quirkless or having a non-combat quirk. Izuku was sure many students would feel like they weren't given the chance of proving themselves. In Quirkist society. All Might played a recorded video on the screen, where the nice girl showed up, explaining she went to the teachers right after the exam to negotiate. All Might was being overly dramatic during the whole explanation, and Izuku did his best to ignore him. Excuse me, the person with curly hair and freckles, you know who I'm talking about. Is it possible for me to give him some of my points? What? Why? He lost enough points because of me. He attacked the 0-pointer when he could have been earning points. He saved me. So please. All Might stopped the video. In addition to now having a quirk, what the, dude? Why would you say that in front of the camera crew? Do you want people to know your secret? Your actions spurred others to act. The entrance exam was not graded only on villain points. He resumed the video, where Present Mike explained to the girl, he needed to know her name and thank her. That she could not give him her points, but there was no need anyway, before the number 1 hero took the floor. How can a hero course reject people who save others and do the right thing? I don't know, All Might, how do hero schools let quirkist assholes become pros? This is a job that requires risking one's life to put that into practice. And so, we use rescue points. On the screen appeared the examination results, his name on the top of the list, showing 20 villain, and 80 rescue points next to it. Katsuki's name was underneath his, with 77 villain points, and no rescue, shocker. The blonde was going to be so pissed when he saw this. Izuku snickered. This was the first time he bested Katsuki at something, and it was not going to be the last. Midoriya Izuku, you received 80 rescue points, for all your heroic actions during the exam, gaining first place with a total of 100 points. Uraraka Ochako also got 45 points. You both pass. Izuku smiled. The girl, Uraraka, deserved it. Come, Midoriya Shonen. This is your Hero Academia. Izuku grinned. Lovely. Chapter text. The day after receiving his acceptance letter, Izuku met Small Might. That's what he decided to call the man when he was in his true form, on Dagoba Beach so the hero could congratulate him up close. All Might said he hadn't told the school about his connection with Izuku, making him want to deadpan so hard. Not only did he literally say in front of the camera, now that you have a quirk, but there is something I must talk to him about. When the crew told him to hurry up, there is no way he could hide this from the staff. That man could not keep a secret for the life of him. And he definitely wouldn't be able to hide anything from the principal, a person, animal, with a literal IQ quirk, although Nezu was probably already informed. It was futile trying to hide anything from him, anyway. When Izuku exclaimed that he was surprised to find out he was a UA teacher, All Might explained how he was offered the job while he was looking for a successor. But instead of a promising hero student, you gave your quirk to a random quirkless kid. Oh, I wanted to talk to you about something, Izuku said. My bones were shattered when I used one for all. You knew this would happen, right? The hero rubbed the back of his neck. Well, yes, there wasn't any time. For a simple sentence, sure, but it turned out all right, All Might. Izuku cringed. Right now, you're either at 100% or 0. But once you learn how to control it, you'll be able to adjust to what your body can handle. So, will you teach me to control it? The more you train a vessel, the more you'll be able to move the power freely, like this, he said, turning into his buff form and crushing a tin can with his fist. Of course, people noticed him, so, before Izuku could point out he didn't answer his question, he started running away. Izuku facepalmed, and run after him. For the next few days, after school, Izuku would meet up with All Might for training. He had asked the hero for ideas so he won't break his bones every time he used his quirk. The hero would insist on strengthening his vessel, but Izuku argued that he still would have to learn to activate and use just enough power, so that it wouldn't shatter his arms. So, apart from strength training, he would experiment on different techniques, trying to use only a percentage of one for all each time, but he couldn't make the surge of power stop. That's when an incredible idea formed in his mind. He figured, since he could only activate his quirk in its full power each time, if he, instead of focusing one for all in one place, he spread it out across his body, each part would be distributed only a percentage of its power, without being too much for his bones to shatter when he used it. And so, full cowl was created. Thus, he trained to keep one for all activated evenly across his body, rather than focusing on one section at a time. He quickly found out that by keeping it constantly activated, he wouldn't have to waste time rechanneling it from one part of his body to another, while also increasing his reflexes and maneuverability. He convinced All Might to add sparring in his training, so he could incorporate his new technique with his martial arts skills, and the hero was more than happy to teach him to fight. His weaponless fighting style would become a combination of Aikido and brute strength punches and kicks. Of course, he continued his Aikido training, and using the staff had become second nature to him. When he was researching various weapons he could learn to use, back when he first started training, he had been fascinated by knives, and now that he didn't have any deadlines, he had a bit more free time, so he took the opportunity to research how to use them. He started training on his own, looking at his notes and following tutorials on them, but he later found himself being taught by the most unexpected person. He was in his way home from Aikido class. He had stayed an hour longer, set on getting right the new move his sensei showed him with the staff, so by the time he got outside, it was already dark, a few dim street lamps the only source of illumination. Izuku walked barely 2 blocks from the martial arts center, before he heard a cry in an alley just ahead of him. Confident in his fighting abilities and use of the staff he had on his back, he approached, prepared to fight if he had to. He stayed as quiet as he could, peeking in the alley to see what was going on, when he saw a blonde girl in space buns, around the same age as him, if her middle school uniform was any indication, getting attacked by a group of teenage boys. One of them was holding her against the wall, using a metal bending quirk of some kind to trap her with a metal pole he had wrapped around her. The boy next to him was making spider webs with his hands, and had used them to keep her mouth shut and her arms and legs pinned on the wall. The third one didn't have a visible quirk, but was holding a knife. The girl's cat-like eyes were wide open, and she was trembling with fear, thrashing against her restraints, her screams muffled by the thick web that covered her face below her nose. Izuku watched the scene, trying to form a plan to take her attackers by surprise and incapacitate them without putting her in danger. "You're not so scary without your knives, now, are you?" The one who had presumably taken her weapon, said with a stupid grin. "We thought we had finally gotten rid of you when you left." The spider web dude grimaced with disgust. "You seriously thought you could attack Saito like a monster and get away with it, you blood-ing demon?" The one holding her with the metal pole questioned, closing his fists and tightened her restraints. The girl had tears streaming down her face, and she was shaking like a leaf. Izuku quietly took the staff, his wooden one, that he used for training, out of its case and placed his bag on the ground before stepping closer. The asshole with the knife got closer and towered over her. He was at least 15 centimeters taller, and in the dim lighting he seemed more intimidating than he probably was. "We're going to make you pay for what you did. Disgusting monsters like you should be punished." The boy had brought the knife to her cheek, but before he got to use it, Izuku had already come close enough to swing his staff in a reverse strike, hitting the boy on the right side of his head. The shock and pain made him drop the knife, and he stumbled sideways. Izuku gave him no time to recover, performing a cross strike on his head, effectively knocking him out. By the time he collapsed, the other two had come out of their shock after seeing their friend getting attacked, and the spider web dude pointed his palms at Izuku, and shot a concentrated cobweb at him. Izuku swiftly evaded the attack and swept him off his feet, knocking him to the ground, and used a downward thrust on his abdomen, before stomping his nose with his foot for good measure. As a loud crack echoed in the alley, the asshole screamed and brought his hands on his bleeding face, but Izuku ignored him and focused on the third guy. The dude was obviously torn between keeping the girl restrained and letting her go to help his friends, but Izuku gave him no time to make a decision. He used a downward strike on his head, followed by an upward kick on his jaw, sending him tumbling backwards. He lost his balance and fell on his back, and Izuku used a final strike with his staff to hit him in the dick. The asshole howled with pain, but Izuku didn't show any pity. He stared at him, his body relaxed, holding the staff loosely. "Leave." With that single word, the teenager got up and ran away clumsily, and the web dude and other guy, who had regained consciousness, were quick to go after him. They didn't dare utter a word as Izuku followed them with his eyes until they got out of sight. Izuku then placed his weapon on the ground and turned to the crying girl. The pole that was keeping her against the wall had loosened and fallen down when Izuku attacked the dude with the metal-bending quirk, and she was now sitting on the ground, the web on her face removed, her dropped knife in her hand. Izuku put his hands in the air, to show he had no ill intent, and slowly approached. "I am not going to hurt you. I want to help. Are you hurt?" He crouched on her level and kept his hands in front of him, but made no move to touch her. Why? She was trembling, but the hand that was holding her knife was surprisingly steady. "I saw those guys attack you, and I couldn't sit back and watch," he answered simply. "So, what? You decided to play the hero?" She scowled, repulsed, baring her teeth. Her canines were pointed and sharp, matching her cat-like slit irises. Her yellow eyes were glaring at him, but Izuku could tell she was afraid. Another kid failed by the heroes, he thought. He could relate deeply, and didn't hesitate to show it. He let out a humorless chuckle. "I am no hero." That seemed to take her by surprise. "Then why did you help me?" she questioned, narrowing her eyes. "Like I said, you looked like you needed it. I was there, and could help, so I did." A few moments passed in silence as she contemplated his answer. Finally, she dropped the knife and lifted her shirt enough to show a bruise forming on her prominent ribs, a cut just underneath them. "The jerk who trapped me with the metal squeezed it a bit too much. I think my ribs are cracked." Izuku asked if he could take a look, explaining he had some experience with tending wounds, and after receiving a nod, he poked her ribs lightly. She hissed but otherwise didn't complain. "I don't think they're broken, but they will be bruised for a couple weeks." He got up and took his first aid kit out of his bag. He always carried one with him, even though the bullies at school had stopped attacking him months ago. He cleaned her cut and wrapped her torso with some gauze, before giving her some painkillers and a bottle of water to wash it down. She accepted, and slowly started returning to what Izuku assumed was her usual cheerful attitude. "My name is Toga Himiko," she introduced herself, a small smile creeping in her face. "I'm Midoriya Izuku. Nice to meet you, Toga. Call me Himiko, and I'll call you Izuku-chan. You're very cute." Izuku's ears turned a bit red, and returned her smile with one of his own. "Thank you, Himiko-chan. You're very cute, too. You have a lovely smile." Apparently, that was the right thing to say, because her eyes went wide, gleaming. Her cheeks were painted rosy pink, contrasting her otherwise pale face. Her smile widened, more than what one would consider the usual amount, her canines in full display. Izuku wondered if they had anything to do with her quirk. "You really think so? People usually say it's creepy and disturbing. Especially when I drink their blood," she said sheepishly. "I do, it's really cute. Does drinking blood have to do with your quirk?" he asked with genuine curiosity, which she seemed to notice. Her eyes lit up even more and started nodding as she shook with excitement. Having a blood-related quirk, she probably hadn't many people ask her without being disgusted or judgmental. "Yeah, I can transform into anyone whose blood I drink. But I don't just drink it to use my quirk. I think my body needs blood regularly, 'cause if I go too long without it, I go really bloodthirsty." Izuku thought that Himiko had probably been deprived of her needs many times. Blood quirks received a lot of backlash, and even though they weren't as rare, Vlad King could control blood and he was a pro-hero for sake. Society wasn't as accommodating to people's needs. She looked like she was contemplating something, before looking at Izuku with a pleading face. "Can I have some of your blood?" He was taken by surprise, and Himiko seemed to regret her words. She was now clutching her knife, and avoided eye contact, probably expecting Izuku to freak out and call her disgusting. But the ex-hero fanboy knew all about quirks, and she was probably asking, not for the fun of it, but because she actually needed it. "Sure, how much do you need?" He extended his arms in invitation. She jumped, baffled with his response, and furrowed her eyebrows, disbelief and hesitation obvious in her eyes and body language. "It's okay, really, you need it, right?" he insisted. She nodded, and a few moments later she drew a cut on his forearm, and began ing his blood with her teeth. Izuku watched with fascination. When she was finished, he wrapped his hand with some gauze and drank some water. He might be a bit lightheaded for a few hours, but it didn't bother him. "You probably don't get much, do you?" He gave her a small smile in understanding. He may not have grown up with a quirk, but he knew all about quirk discrimination, and Himiko's case was no exception. Tears started gathering at the corners of her eyes. "No, I don't. I was always fascinated by blood, even though I didn't need it before my quirk manifested." Himiko hesitated. Izuku tilted his head, silently telling her to speak her mind. "When I was little, I found a dead bird on the yard and brought it to my parents, because I thought it was pretty. They thought it was disturbing, and took me to quirk counseling to fix me." She played with her knife while explaining. "It didn't work, obviously. They thought they could make me normal and behave. I pretended it worked, and would drink blood from dead animals secretly. But as I grew older, it got even more difficult to pretend I was the perfectly normal and well-behaved little girl they thought I was." Izuku hummed, and urged her to continue. "One time, a friend of mine got hurt, and I ate her injury. I thought it was normal. But when my parents found out, they said I was rotten to the core. That they created something inhuman. I didn't understand what I did wrong, and they would just yell at me, asking why I couldn't be normal." "You did nothing wrong, Himiko-chan. You were just different from them. It's not your fault they didn't try to understand you," Izuku pointed out, brows furrowed. Even though he had long accepted the injustice of their world, Himiko's words tucked his heart in a way that made him resent it even more. He felt the urge to protect this girl, who was failed by society, and even her own parents. He reached for her hands, silently asking for permission. She accepted, and Izuku took her small hands in his own, and squeezed. She smiled at him and squeezed back. "Thank you, Izuku-chan. I know that now, and I want to live true to myself. But back then, I just wanted to be loved, until it became too much." She paused for a second before speaking again. "Last year, at the end of middle school, I liked this boy. I think I did anyway. Most people don't want to drink the blood of the people they love, anyway. One day, I was really hungry, I hadn't had blood in months, and I saw him at school and I snapped. I attacked him and drank his blood. I felt so happy and so sad at the same time. I was crying and it was a mess, until a classmate found me. The police wanted to arrest me, and my parents would not hesitate to hand me over. They called me a demon, a lost cause. So, I ran away. I've been on the streets ever since." She looked him in the eyes as she finished her story. She tried to find any sign of judgment, any indication Izuku would be weirded out and leave. But he didn't. Instead, he smiled and told her his own story. How he was born quirkless, and the treatment he got because of it. How he lost his father, and his best friend, because of something he couldn't control. After a very long time, Izuku felt comfortable talking to someone. He was finally able to voice his true thoughts, his disdain towards society, and how it failed him. How the heroes failed him, when he wanted to be one of them. He told Himiko about his meeting with All Might, leaving out his secrets, about his quirk and injury, and how he broke his dreams. Instead of revealing the truth about One for All, he said that he manifested his quirk really late. That's what he would tell everyone who asked, and what he had to tell him mom when he started training with All Might to get in UA. He also told her about his plan. It was vague at the moment, and he didn't have a specific end goal, but he explained why he trained and got in UA's hero course. He recounted his wish to change the hero society from its core, and what better way to bring it down than from within. Himiko was listening intently, sometimes chiming in to provide her own thoughts. They were talking for about 2 hours by the time his mom called asking where he was. He was supposed to come home straight from Aikido class. He told her not to worry, and that he would be there soon. "I'm sorry I have to leave you. But I really enjoyed talking to you. I hope we can meet again sometime." Izuku gathered his stuff and got up. Himiko's eyes lit up. "Really? Me too. I don't have a phone, but I can meet you wherever you want. I have Aikido training the day after tomorrow. Do you want to meet me outside of the martial arts center over there?" He pointed towards the building as they exited the alley and entered the main road. "When I'm done." "Sure thing, Izuku-chan. You're really good with the staff, by the way. I prefer knives, though. I have been training for a long time, and I now can't live without them." She patted her skirt, where she had hidden her weapon. Izuku's eyes widened as an idea formed in his head. "Will you teach me? I really want to learn how to use them, but I haven't found anyone to teach me. It's not exactly a heroic weapon." He made a grimace, and waited for his new friend's reply. He received a crushing hug before her verbal confirmation that she would gladly be his teacher. They exchanged a few more words before they parted, and Izuku headed home. He was smiling to himself the whole way. He just made his first friend in a very long time. Chapter text. "I am here." Izuku groaned, as his phone played the ringtone that signaled the beginning of the day. He quickly got up to close the alarm, not wanting to hear the number 1 hero shout in his ear at 6 a.m. again. He had chosen that ringtone specifically to get on his nerves enough to make him get out of bed. His training with All Might, and his Aikido classes, followed by his knife-wielding lessons with Himiko-chan were beginning to take their toll on him. He was constantly sore and tired, and having to go to school on top of his busy schedule wasn't helping. Thankfully, today was the last day of middle school, and Izuku was almost excited to go. He wouldn't have to see his awful teachers and classmates ever again. He wouldn't be able to avoid Katsuki though, since they were going to UA together. Katsuki had been so pissed the day after they received their acceptance letters. He came up to Izuku before the bell rang, crackling sounds coming from his palms. He didn't usually lose control of his quirk, so he must have been angrier than usual. He approached Izuku, stomping loudly, making everyone in his way take a step back, to avoid getting in the crossfire. When he reached Izuku's desk, he used his quirk on it, on a failed attempt to intimidate him. "Deku, what do you want, Katsuki?" Izuku sighed. The blonde was still not used to hearing his actual name from Izuku's mouth, and scowled in contempt. "What trick did you pull to get to the hero course, huh? There's no way a quirkless Deku like you got first place without cheating." Everyone within earshot audibly gasped. Midoriya Izuku, the weak useless kid, getting into the top hero school in Japan, that had a 1 in 300 acceptance rate, and in first place. Surely, he cheated his way in. Murmurs echoed in the classroom, that Izuku promptly ignored. He just stared at Katsuki until the bell rang a few seconds later, and the teacher walked in, instructing everyone to sit down. Katsuki mumbled something about getting an explanation later, and sat on his desk. The teacher, after a couple announcements that Izuku didn't bother paying attention to, exclaimed how Aldera had 2 students enrolling into UA. "Especially you, Midoriya. It's a miracle." Izuku didn't dignify that with a response, while Katsuki clicked his tongue loudly. At the end of the day, he cornered Izuku before he left the school grounds. He pushed him to a wall and went to grab him by his shirt, but Izuku's reflexes allowed him to evade it, resulting in Katsuki hitting his fist on the wall. "What dirty tricks did you use to get in, huh?" He attempted to grab Izuku again, who ducked and got out of the way, making the blonde lose his balance and almost fall. "The first student from his school to go to UA. My future plan has already been torn to pieces. Why did it matter that much to him? Wasn't he gonna be the #1 hero. I told you to go somewhere else. He swung his fist at Izuku, but the greenette stopped it with his hand. I really don't care about your stupid plan. Whether you like it or not, I'm going to UA, and there's nothing you can do about it. Sew it up. He let go of the angry boy's fist and walked away, not bothering getting an answer. Katsuki had been quiet ever since. It was a bit unnerving, but Izuku preferred it to getting pestered all the time. Izuku approached the school gate as the memory faded away. He was on autopilot mode, and attended the graduation ceremony without paying much attention. He did feel everyone's eyes on him as his name got called. The principal handed him his diploma and congratulated him on his acceptance in the hero course. He gave a nod in return, and walked back to his seat, most students still staring at him, Katsuki, gaze lingering the most. His mom was at work and couldn't attend his graduation, and Himiko was a wanted criminal and couldn't risk anyone seeing her, so Izuku didn't have to stay any longer at that god's forsaken hellhole, while everyone else was taking pictures and cheering the end of the school year. He had 2 weeks left until his first day at UA. Since he didn't have to go to school, he took advantage of his free time to rest more, and train harder. His lessons with Himiko were paying off. After his martial arts training, he would meet her outside, and they would go to the building she had been seeking refuge in for the past few months on the run. His prior research and attempts on knife wielding were nothing compared to the hardships the girl made him go through. After she had taught him the basics, and took him to the market in the sketchiest part of Musudafu to try different types of knives, he ended up getting seal knives, a couple easy concealed ones and a few throwing knives. She showed him different techniques for all his choices, and proceeded to attack him relentlessly. His training with her would always start this way, a few minutes of barely evading and counter-attacking her merciless stabs and slices. She had a rather unconventional way of teaching him, but her ruthless attacks were keeping his reflexes sharp and his mind constantly on overdrive, resulting in him starting to be able to defend himself without even thinking about it. Once he became good enough with short-range attacks, she would tutor him on throwing knives, but considering the short amount of time he had dedicated on training with those weapons, it would be a while. He preferred being adept with one type of weapon, rather than mediocre with many. His training with All Might, on the other hand, was way easier and casual. Izuku would have to keep his quirk activated for as long as he could, while the hero threw different moves at him to counter. By the time April came, he could use one for all without breaking any of his bones, and as his first day at UA Monday, April 8th, grew closer and closer, he was experienced enough to use it freely with barely any strain on his body. Looking back, he had changed so much during the past year, he barely recognized himself. He was no longer the weak quirkless kid everyone ridiculed. He wasn't the helpless delusional little boy who wanted to be a hero. He had shed sweat and tears and broke his bones and fell bloody on the ground before coming back up again, stronger and more determined. He had pushed himself beyond his limits, and gained a quirk he could use effectively, a body that wouldn't collapse even after hours of training, and an arsenal of weapons he could wield with ease. For the first time in his life, he was proud of himself. And he had a friend who would support him, no matter what. Izuku straightened his tie, took one last look in the mirror and bid his mother goodbye before heading at UA for his first day of high school. Once he arrived, he wandered in the halls of the huge building, looking for classroom 1A, where he had been assigned at. He found a massive door that corresponded with his classroom, and braced himself, before opening the door and stepped inside. Don't put your feet on the desk. Of course he would end up in the same class as his friend turned bully turned whatever he was now. Izuku knew he would be seeing him often, since they both got in, but he had hoped they wouldn't end up in the same class. Maybe they placed them together on purpose, being from the same middle school. Oh well, Izuku wouldn't do anything to provoke him, but he wouldn't be responsible for Katsuki's actions if he decided to act like an asshole. But alas, Katsuki managed to make a scene on his first day. The stiff boy from the practical exam orientation was scolding him for being rude to his upperclassmen and the people who made the desk, while chopping the air with his arms like a robot. Oh, he was a stickler for rules. Lovely. The boy introduced himself as Iida Tenya, a Somei Private Academy graduate. So, he was the person who got third place on the practical exam, just below Katsuki. This would be fun. Somei, you're a damn elite, huh? I'll have fun crushing you. The blonde taunted. The poor boy wasn't used to him, and took the bait. Crushing. That's terrible. Do you truly aim to be hero? Apparently, he did, and thought he will actually be one, even with that attitude. Izuku put on his friendly neighborhood hero student persona, and addressed Iida as he entered the classroom. Don't bother with him, Iida-kun, he's way too stubborn to reason with. Everyone's heads turned to him. The dude enthusiastically marched towards him. Good morning, I am from Somei Private Academy. My name is Iida Tenya. I'm Midoriya Izuku. Nice to meet you, Iida-kun. Midoriya-kun, I congratulate you for placing first on the practical exam. You realized there was something more to it, didn't you? I hate to admit it, but you are better than me, he said, chopping invisible onions. The thought almost made Izuku burst out laughing. No, I actually didn't realize anything. He did, but decided to play the role of an innocent puppy, rubbing the back of his neck. Oh, those curly hair. You're that boy. A familiar voice sounded from behind him. He recognized the nice girl from the exam, Uraraka, he thought her name was. I'm so glad you passed, just like Present Mike said. Of course you did. Your punch was amazing. She punched the air excitedly. Oh, right. Thank you for what you asked him, I really appreciate it. He gave her a blinding smile. How do you know that? They told me on my acceptance letter. It was really kind of you, so thank you again. He bowed in appreciation. From the corner of his eye, he saw Katsuki scowling at him, like always. Uraraka was pondering on what their teacher would be like, when a deep voice spoke from behind her. Go somewhere else if you want to play friends. Izuku saw a man in a bright yellow sleeping bag, laying on the floor. This is the hero course, he said, opening his sleeping bag just enough to bring a juice pack to his mouth, and slurped it in one go. He then got up and stepped out of it. Okay. It took 8 seconds before you were quiet. Time is limited. You kids are not rational enough. Oh, Izuku liked this guy. Speaking of, the dude, who was probably a pro hero, considering he was their teacher, was the most tired man Izuku had ever seen. He wore all black, with the exception of his gray scarf, and his long black hair hung loosely on his shoulders. I'm your homeroom teacher, Aizawa Shota. Nice to meet you. He spoke as if he was definitely not happy to meet them. Before he gave the students a chance to react, apart from the collective, EHH, that echoed in the classroom, he took out a gym uniform from his sleeping bag, and instructed them to put theirs on and go out onto the field. No orientation. This dude went straight to the point. Instead of gawking over their weird homeroom teacher, Izuku made his way to the changing rooms, and into a secluded corner, to change into his gym uniform. He wasn't ashamed of his body or his scars, but he didn't want to attract unnecessary attention to himself, nor did he want anyone to question the array of starburst scars on his torso and upper arms. Some of them had figured out he had known Katsuki before UA, and he wouldn't be opposed to make the blonde's life a living hell for tormenting him for years, but that would also mean having to talk about himself. He would rather play the part of the happy-go-lucky hero student, and when he would finally set his plan of revealing the truth about the hero society into motion, he could drop the bomb. Having a bully and quirkist asshole in the hero course of the top hero school in all of Japan wouldn't be taken lightly. He also didn't feel like explaining the self-harm scars on his thighs, or get pitied because of them. No one in his class knew he grew up quirkless and the hardships he faced because of that, but regardless, going back to one of the darkest times of his life wasn't very appealing. A quirk assessment test. What about the entrance ceremony? Uraraka asked, when everyone had gathered outside. If you're going to become a hero, you don't have time for such leisurely events, Aizawa said. UA's selling point is how unrestricted its school traditions are. That's how the teachers run their classes. He looked back at his students with bloodshot eyes, prominent eye bags shadowing them. You kids have been doing these since junior high, too, right? Physical fitness tests where you weren't allowed to use your quirks. The country still uses averages taken from results from students not using their quirks. It's not rational. He turned to Katsuki. Bakugo. The blonde didn't seem to expect to be addressed. In junior high, what was your best result for the softball throw? Oh, he probably wanted someone who placed high in the exam to demonstrate. But he obviously didn't want to use Izuku. He had used his quirk only once on the exam and he shattered 3 limbs. 67 meters. Then, try doing it with your quirk. You can do whatever you want as long as you stay in the circle. Katsuki grinned. Of course, he would want to showcase how strong he was at any given chance. Die! He screamed as he used a big explosion to throw the ball as far as he could. Izuku noted he had thrown it at the best possible angle of 45 degrees. He knew what he was doing. Know your own maximum first. The tracker Aizawa was holding showed 705.2 meters. That is the most rational way to form the foundation of a hero. He had a point, but many quirks had no application on these tests. It would be stupid to measure an average score when many people couldn't, or didn't know how to, use their quirks for that. That sounded like quirkist bullshit to Izuku, but it's not like he didn't understand where his teacher was coming from. He was a heroics teacher, after all. When he showed Katsuki's result to the class, gasps sounded all around him. It looks fun. Fun. Izuku wanted to laugh at the pink girl's face for being so naive, but Aizawa beat him to it. It looks fun, huh? You have 3 years to become heroes. Will you have an attitude like that the whole time? His lips formed a maniacal grin. All right, whoever comes in last place in all 8 tests will be judged to have no potential, and will be expelled. Izuku held back a grin of his own. The man was obviously bluffing, but everyone else seemed to buy it, so he sported a surprised expression and joined them in their shocked reaction. We're free to do what we want about the circumstances of our students. Welcome to UA's hero course, Aizawa exclaimed, and Izuku could no longer hold back his grin. He took it as a personal challenge, to prove himself. Not as a hero, not as one of them, but better. But it's the first day of school. And even if it wasn't, this is too unfair. Uraraka protested. Unfair, Izuku thought with a scowl on his face. Life is never fair. I have never been treated fairly in my whole life. Things will always be unfair because that's just how the world works. Complaining will change none of that. Privileged people should really take a look on the real world and actually see just how miserable it can be. Aizawa seemed to be on the same page, when everyone else weren't even on the same book. Natural disasters, big accidents, and selfish villains. Calamities whose time or place can't be predicted. The world is covered with unfairness. That's right, Aizawa knew how the world worked, and didn't hesitate to show it. Maybe this generation of heroes weren't so doomed after all. Heroes are the only ones who reverse those situations. And there, he lost him. Heroes were supposed to restore some balance to the injustice that the system really is, but they're the ones supporting it, in the end. Saving people is just a font for gaining fame and money. Izuku could fill a library with his thoughts on injustice and fake heroes, but now wasn't the right time to ponder on it. For the next 3 years, UA will do all it can to give you one hardship after the other. Go beyond, plus ultra, or whatever. Overcome it will all you've got. The maniacal grin, that apparently was his second default expression, the first being, done with life, hadn't left his face during his whole speech. It kind of inspired Izuku to copy him, so he let a grin of his own show. All right, demonstration is over. The real thing starts now. With Aizawa's last words, everyone got hyped up, ready to give their all. Izuku glanced at his classmates, most of which had a look of determination on their face. Some were nervous, and one red and white-haired boy seemed almost bored. Izuku couldn't figure him out. He spared a glance at Katsuki, and gave him his best, good luck, smile that was sure to irritate him. He wasn't in Aldera anymore. Katsuki hopefully wouldn't get away with attacking a classmate. He had closed his eyes when he smiled, so he didn't get to see the blonde's reaction as he turned and headed towards the gym, where they would perform the first couple of exercises. He didn't have to use his quirk at the beginning. Sit-ups and seated toe touch exercises were part of his warm-up during his martial arts lessons, so he was fairly adept and flexible for both of them, and got a pretty high score. Next was the grip strength test. Izuku decided not to use his quirk on that one. While he had gotten pretty good at using full cowl and keeping it activated as he sparred with All Might, he wasn't yet experienced with the power output he released. Any grip he had to do would end up just shattering the device, not allowing it to actually measure his grip strength. So, he used his brute strength on that one. 67 kilograms wasn't that bad, anyway. Then, they got out on the field and began the rest of the tests. Repeated side steps were first, where he got an average score, and then came the ball throw that Katsuki had so kindly demonstrated earlier. As more and more students did the ball throw, Katsuki would have that stupid grin on his face, because he kept having the best score. That changed, however, when Uraraka used her quirk to nullify the ball's gravitational pull. It ended up going above some of the atmosphere's layers, making the device show the infinity symbol. Everyone cheered in surprise, while Katsuki returned his face to his default scowl, which deepened when it was Izuku's turn. He stepped into the circle, and took a deep breath. This was the first time he would use his quirk outside of his training with All Might, and also the first time his teacher and classmates would see him use it without breaking his bones. He barely heard the conversation Iida was having with Katsuki. I wonder what Midoriya-kun will do in this one. It's gonna go terribly. He's a quirkless fry, you know, he said underminingly, gaining a surprised gasp from Iida. Quirkless? Are you not aware of what he did in the entrance exam? Katsuki didn't know he had a quirk at all. Explaining that would be fun. He was in no mood to please him when he would come forward expecting answers, so if he had to say anything to not make a scene, he'll just tell him what he'd planned on telling the teachers. He activated full cowl, drew his right hand back, and as he was about to use one for all at 5%, the most he could use at the moment without injuring himself, and brought forth his arm to throw the ball, he felt the quirk vanish. He still threw it, at 98 meters. Not bad, but definitely not what he was aiming for. He frowned and looked at his hand, before Aizawa spoke. I erased your quirk. He turned his head towards his teacher, but was met with a very different demeanor than what he expected. Aizawa's eyes were glowing red, and his hair were levitating, along with his scarf, that was floating around him while he held it, in a stance ready to attack. What drew Izuku's attention, though, were the bright yellow goggles that were previously concealed by the capture weapon. He immediately recognized Eraserhead, an underground hero, one of the only ones that Izuku still respected. He never claimed credits for any of his work, and he avoided the media like the plague. He wasn't driven by money or fame, he genuinely wanted to help people. He even patrolled in the shadier part of Musudafu. He had taken a glimpse of him a couple of times when he hung out with Himiko-chan in her temporary residency. The entrance exam was definitely not rational enough. Even a kid like you was accepted. From what I can tell, you can't control your quirk, can you? Oh, so that was it was. Eraserhead only knew that he had broken his bones on the entrance exam, and thought he would still try to use it the same way. Before Izuku could explain himself, the hero continued his speech. Do you intend to become incapacitated again, and have someone to save you? What, Eraserhead? No, that's not. He got interrupted when Aizawa captured him with his weapon and pulled him closer to himself. He heard his classmates murmur about the Erasure hero, when Izuku revealed the name. Most of them hadn't heard of him. He was underground for a reason. Whatever your intentions are, that's what those around you will be forced to do. He glared at Izuku with those burning red eyes, that reminded him a bit too much of someone else who would look at him with that expression of dissatisfaction and resentment. In the past, there was an oppressively passionate hero, who saved over 1,000 people by himself and created a legend. All Might, even if you have the same reckless valor, All Might bashing. Sign me in, you'll just be decked and turn into a useless doll after saving one person. Midoriya Izuku, with your power, you can't become a hero. Okay, that was enough. He might have been right, if Izuku didn't think of a way to use his quirk effectively, because his mentor surely wouldn't. And those words might have hurt like a bitch, had he not accepted he would not become a hero, whether he had a quirk or not. Because he didn't want to, not because he couldn't. But this rant was based on a misunderstanding. So Izuku looked him in the eyes, and spoke before Aizawa could say anything more. Sensei, you misunderstand. I don't have to break my limbs anymore. I found a way around it since the entrance exam. Well, that got his attention. He turned off his quirk and brought his capture weapon to rest on his shoulders again. Aizawa raised an eyebrow, but didn't wait for further explanation, as he turned his back on Izuku and walked away. Then hurry up and get it over with. For a person of few words, and who obviously prefers actions rather than explanations, he made 2 speeches already today. Maybe he wanted to play the strict teacher role or something. Izuku casually returned to the circle, and activated full cowl. He glanced at Aizawa, to make sure he wouldn't erase his quirk again, and threw the ball with all his might. Wait, no, not that word, strength is better, a small grunt escaping his throat. The ball flew with tremendous force, and gasps of shock and surprise sounded from his classmates. He turned to his teacher, whose device read 705.3. It was just 0.1 meters more than Katsuki's score, but even that small difference would definitely wound the explosive boy's pride. He smiled at Aizawa proudly. See, my arms are fine, and gained a feral grin in return. He got over 700 meters. That's so cool, a hero-like score. What? Katsuki also got more than 700. But he said, die, so Izuku could see why Uraraka would ignore him. That was so different than the entrance exam. He has a strange quirk. Iida seemed to ponder it calmly, unlike Katsuki, who was staring at Izuku with his eyes and mouth wide open. His surprise turned into anger, shocking, and a few explosions popped off his palms. What is the meaning of this? He then ran towards him, ready to attack him as he shouted. Hey, tell me what's going on, Deku, you bastard. Izuku watched him run with a smile on his face, which widened when Aizawa pulled Katsuki back with his capture weapon. What the? Geez, stop making me use my quirk over and over. I have dry eye. Well, that would be expected. Izuku didn't know why his classmates sounded so surprised. You can release him, sensei. I'll explain later. He gave a bright smile to his teacher, and then a knowing look to his former friend. If you behave, I'll tell you. Not the truth, obviously, but what some people would have to know if All Might didn't want his secrets being found out. Whatever. We're wasting time. Whoever's next, get on with it. Izuku used his quirk on the rest of the tests, too. With full cowl on, he bested Katsuki on the 50-meter dash by 0.17 seconds. The blonde's face was hilarious, but the best time went to Iida, who had literal engines in his legs. In the long-distance run, he got a pretty good place, too. Finally, he managed to clear the sandbox in the standing long jump, but landed a couple 100 meters further than he meant to. He had a long way to go, to use his quirk exactly how he wanted to. Aizawa showed them their results, a ranking based on the sum of all their previous scores, on a hologram. Izuku had placed third, right after Yaoyorozu Momo and Todoroki Shoto, was he Endeavor's son, and Katsuki placed fourth, just below him. Just like the entrance exam results. Izuku was loving this. Katsuki was fuming, he was sure of it. On last place was Hagakure Toru, the invisible girl. See, even though Aizawa was calling bullshit when he said he would expel the last placer, it would be genuine unfairness to judge people with mental quirks, or like hers are quirkless people, but there has never been a quirkless hero student, so it wouldn't even matter to them quirks that are not applicable to those tests. It was ridiculous. Hagakure had realized her placement and was currently crying softly. Izuku stepped a bit towards her and whispered, "Don't worry, he won't expel you. He knows it would be another kind of unfair for you to leave without showing what you really got, and those tests were never in your favor." The girl looked, felt like she was, sounded, surprised to hear such words from her quiet, shy, but also super strong, classmate. You really think so? Her crying had died down to quiet sniffs. I'm sure of it. His own quirk wouldn't help him either. He can erase other people's quirks, but on his own, in these particular tests, he would be competing quirkless, like you. She didn't respond, probably thinking about what he had just told her. By the way, I was lying about the expulsion, Aizawa said, like he was bored. Then his lips formed a huge grin. It was just a logical ruse. The rest of his sentence, about wanting to draw out everyone's quirk's upper limits, was overshadowed by the surprised shrieks of his unsuspecting classmates. Of course it was a lie. That was Yaoyorozu Momo. Izuku thought her name was Yaomomo in his head for short. It should have been obvious if you just thought it through. That was nerve-wracking. Right, I'll take up the challenge anytime. Izuku heard a couple classmates exclaim. He turned to Hagakure. See, I told you. He's not as strict as he wants people to think he is. He barely heard the girl's soft, "Thank you," before heading to his teacher. With that, we're done here. There are handouts with the curriculum and stuff in the classroom, so when you get back, look over them. Day 1 over, huh? Tomorrow will be packed with even more rigorous tests. Prepare yourselves. He then turned to Izuku. Midoriya, you wanted to talk to me, right? Come with me, he said, and turned left towards the classroom building. Izuku went to follow him, when a hand went to grab his shoulder. He swiftly took the arm before it got near enough to touch him, and flipped the person over his shoulder into the ground on their back. If it was any other person, he would just evade and tell them how he doesn't like to be touched without permission, never mind unexpectedly. But this time, he could smell smoke, the familiar scent that remained for a while after Katsuki used his quirk, meaning it was the blonde bastard, so maybe he would finally learn a lesson about boundaries here, if UA wasn't a failure of a school, like most educational establishments nowadays. Damn, Deku, chill. I just wanted to go with you to Aizawa. He dusted his pants and took his usual gruff attitude. Fine. I'm only doing this so I won't have to explain everything twice, Izuku simply said. As he took a step towards where Aizawa was waiting for him, he turned to Katsuki, looked him in the eye, a polite smile on his face. And next time, don't touch me without permission, or behind my back. I really don't like to be touched. He barely caught the shocked and concerned expressions of his classmates, that happened to be standing there. Chapter text. Why is the kid here? Aizawa was leaning with his back against the wall. Izuku stood opposite of him, and Katsuki mimicked their teacher a little further. Katsuki is here, because he so kindly demanded to know how I, a quirkless loser, got into UA, and in first place for that matter, as well as how I suddenly have a quirk that everyone expected would break my bones, and then didn't. Katsuki was obviously not fan of that explanation. Still, Izuku preferred his funny faces to slamming doors and desks and blowing things up until he got the answers he so craved. What do you mean, quirkless? Aizawa furrowed his eyebrows, obviously hearing something completely different than what he expected. That's what I wanted to talk to you about, and it's something that I would rather the whole school not knowing, so I thought I could kill two birds with one stone and tell you both. The TCH from Katsuki and Aizawa's raised eyebrow were his cues to start talking. So, I was diagnosed quirkless at the age of 4. When everyone found out, my whole world fell apart. My dad left, my friends turned on me, my teachers acted like I was an abomination, a lesser being, not worth being addressed to. Izuku paused. That was not what he was going to talk about today. Oops. Anyway, the point is, I grew up quirkless, but I always wanted to be a hero, and always got hate for it. Ask Katsuki, he would know. We've known each other since diapers. The blonde gave him a look, but otherwise didn't react. Aizawa was frowning, trying to understand the implications of what he had just heard. His mind wandered to the sludge villain incident, where, according to official reports, he didn't do anything. The Hero Commission wouldn't want the media to know a little quirkless kid did the hero's job. He pondered whether he should tell his teacher about that day, and play the part of a humble and determined kid who acted heroically despite his circumstances, but decided against it. Talking shit about the commission on Hero School grounds wasn't the best idea. He still hoped the underground hero wasn't in cahoots with the HPSC. Holy shit, the commission. I know what I'm gonna do today. Midoriya, you alright? You kinda spaced out for a minute. Izuku detected a hint of worry in his teacher's question. Oh, sorry, that happens sometimes, sorry. He rubbed his neck and looked at the ground. Anyway, last year, I started training for the entrance exam. If I made it, I would be the first quirkless hero student Japan has ever seen. But then, a couple of days before the exam, he paused, looking at Katsuki and his teacher in their eyes, mostly for dramatic effect. My quirk manifested. Aizawa had his tired eyes wide open, but Katsuki was taking it in, a little worse. Are you kidding me? He said angrily, but moderately quiet. You had a quirk, this whole time, and it manifested now. I'm a late bloomer, I guess. Izuku shrugged, laughing with the innocence of a child, one that could have been Izuku. Weren't he already done with heroes and their society games? So, until the entrance exam started, I had only used my quirk, superpower, once, when it manifested. I felt a surge of power, and when I used my finger to test it on a glass bottle, both of them shattered. My body was obviously not ready for a super strong quirk, so I tried not to use it unless absolutely necessary on the exam. I brought my staff, as you saw, to take down the robots, but when the zero-pointer came, and Uraraka-san was there, in danger, my legs moved on their own. I couldn't control my quirk at all, but by instinct I used it on my legs, and then my right hand to punch the robot. Izuku took a few moments for the other two to take in what they just heard, and completed his explanation. After the exam, I took the time to find different techniques, hoping to be able to use my quirk without shattering my bones. And I did. I invented full cowl, and it's what I'm working on now. Izuku then turned to his teacher. I don't want any special treatment about it. I've had to work harder than anyone in my class to get where I am, from a weak quirkless kid, to getting first place on the practical exam for the hero course. Please keep in mind that I had 2 months to work on my quirk. Everyone else had at least 10 years. He hoped, with those words, that his teacher would view him just like every other student, but also not see him as a reckless kid who was arrogant enough to not bother training his quirk and end up a liability to anyone. He also didn't want to get on the underground hero's bad side, since he was one of the only ones he still respected. After exchanging a few more words, Izuku left the two behind and headed towards the locker rooms to change into his uniform. Once he turned, however, he saw the buff form of the number 1 hero. Not him again. Oh, hi, All Might. What are you doing here? He was mumbling something about Aizawa seeing the boy's potential, when he noticed said boy and straightened his back. Midoriya Shonen, you did wonderfully in the apprehension test. Congratulations. Thank you, All Might Sensei. He bowed, to hide his annoyed face. Although I wanted to talk to you about something, I overheard you explain to Aizawa-kun about your quirk, and that kid, too. Although I thank you for not telling the complete truth, we had agreed to keep it a secret. Midoriya Shonen. I'm sorry, All Might. I just thought that since Katsuki, Bakugo, knew me since we were babies, it would be suspicious to suddenly develop a quirk, and pretend I always had it. Izuku tried to reason with him. And Aizawa-sensei thought I had no potential, because he knew the quirk broke my bones at the exam, and he would be paying more attention to me than the other students. And if he noticed the similarities between our quirks, and maybe catch us meeting, that would make him also suspicious about it. So, Izuku played with his fingers while he rambled, hoping to come off as nervous. Not only could the hero not keep a secret, Aizawa would have figured it out sooner or later. Well, he did expel a whole first-year class last year, for not having potential, with no hesitation. If he thought so about you, too, it was probably wise to get on his good side, All Might agreed. For an oath, he had at least some common sense. Izuku would still have to be careful. The hero was bound to make careless mistakes and reveal his relationship with him without meaning to. Like coming to talk to him right after class, where students and teachers could obviously see them. Izuku wanted to hit his head on the wall. He doesn't like media attention because he says it hinders his work. He and I don't get along. But he is kind of a good teacher in his own way, All Might was mumbling. That's exactly the reason I like him and not you, you stupid. That's why he is a real one. Anyway, I have to go now. See you later, or never. Izuku didn't give the hero a chance to reply and ran towards the changing rooms. As he reached the school's exit, Iida and Uraraka caught up to him. The two introduced themselves, and the girl turned to Izuku. "And you're Midoriya Deku, right?" Deku. He couldn't help the hint of disgust for the nickname. "Oh, is that not your name? But during the fitness test, that's what that boy, Bakugo, called you." "Oh, no, my name is Izuku. Deku is just what Katsuki calls me to insult me, please don't use it." He gave her an awkward smile, and rubbed his neck. So did the girl, while Iida was wondering why he would call him an insult. "Oh, is that right? I'm sorry, Izuku it is, then." The three proceeded to walk towards the train station together, making chit-chat Izuku didn't really participate in. Instead, he was thinking about his first day of school. Overall, having trained for only a year, he was doing really good. But not enough. If he wanted to bring down and reconstruct this society, he had to be much better than an average UA Hero course student. So, he would strive to be the best. It's just, this time, it wasn't for himself, but for the change he could bring. When he got home, he began working on the idea that formed on his head while talking to Eraserhead. He figured that the whole hero society was being controlled by the Hero Commission, so what better way to bring it down than by finding any dirt he could on them. He could release it on the public, make a case so big no one would be able to deny the facts, ridicule so many heroes that the people would start losing faith in them. He had so many options, but first, he would collect anything he could find. From hidden articles about corrupt heroes, shit the commission tried, but failed, to bury, and maybe find stuff the public wasn't normally able to access. He would have to learn a thing or two about internet access and hacking, then. What better source of information is there than the commission's database itself? He revealed his plan to Himiko after their training that evening. As they ate the bento Izuku prepared, he would always bring her homemade meals, and periodically give her some blood, to help her as much as he could, and she was more than happy to support him. But he would need more people by his side if he wanted to do this correctly. He needed connections. He only needed to find a way to get them. On the second day, school started like any normal high school. They had regular lessons in the morning, like English with present mic, but Izuku was already proficient, so he instead focused on his plans, then lunch, and finally, in the afternoon they had heroics courses. Oh, gods, please, no. Coming through the door like a normal person. Normal people don't announce their entrance loudly, moron. Instead of letting out the huge groan that built up in his throat, Izuku joined his classmates' excitement with a super fake gasp. "I teach basic hero training," he said as he took his place behind the podium. "It is a subject where you train in different ways to learn the basics of being a hero." Izuku had a feeling this wouldn't go well. Had this man even trained to be a teacher? Let's get right into it. This is what we're gonna do today, combat training. On the first day, without any prior lessons whatsoever. What the? And to go with that, are these. Behind him, a few cases in the wall opened, that held suitcases with the hero costumes the students made based on their quirk registrations and requests before the school started. Izuku feared what he would see today. Hero schools tended to forget they were teenagers. After they changed, they met the hero at ground beta. Izuku was very satisfied with his hero costume. He had done an incredible amount of research when he had to submit his requests to the school. He had been as thorough as possible, making sure they followed every guideline he provided. He sincerely hoped they actually read and went through his requests for the costume materials and gear. His costume was a two-piece dark green suit, weaved with Kevlar on the inside. The material was fireproof, waterproof, temperature-controlled, shock-resistant, stain-resistant, and impact-absorbent. It had black outlines on the sleeves and sides of both his shirt and pants, as well as shoulder and knee pads. His shirt was flexible and tight, showing the outline of his muscles, but comfortable enough to move around freely. The sleeves were long enough to meet his black fingerless gloves, that went up just above the elbows, and were equipped with elbow pads. His pants were a bit looser than his shirt, with various pockets around the waist and on the sides, for his gadgets and anything else he might need to carry. Dark green goggles, a shade darker than his costume, hung from his neck. They were designed to protect his eyes from dirt, smoke and any toxic substance that might reach them, like the eye irritant that was laced in the smoke bombs he had requested. The only color that stood out in his entire costume were his dark red boots. They weren't the same bright red his everyday shoes were, before he painted them black. Those were the only kind of shoes that were available for people who were quirkless, or rather, who had the extra pinky toe joint, and he didn't want to be branded with them anymore. But the dark shade his steel-toed combat boots bore was both a stylistic choice and a reminder to himself of the hardships he had faced. Finally, his retractable steel staff hung in its black case on his waist. The case was steady enough on his costume, so that it wouldn't bounce while he moved, but it was loose enough so it didn't hinder his movements. Izuku made it outside of Ground Beta, along with some of his classmates, All Might already waiting for them. As he waited for everyone to gather, he looked at some of the students' costumes. And oh, were some of them problematic. First of all, some of the girls' costumes were super utilized. The support department were aware that they were all 15-year-olds, right? Especially Yaomomo's costume, it was as revealing as it gets. Izuku understood that she used her lipids to make stuff, but she didn't have to expose her whole body when she could just have a couple of zippers on. Also, Uraraka's and Ishido's were both unnecessarily skin-tight, and why were they wearing heels? That was so impractical. The worst one, though, was Hagakuri's costume, in Izuku's humble opinion. He couldn't even call it a costume. She was literally naked, save her shoes and a pair of gloves. He was going to have a word with the support department. Surely, they could make a suit that went invisible with her, from her DNA, or something. That didn't mean the boys' costumes were great, either. Kirishima, for example, why was he naked from the waist up? Why wear sleeves, then? Izuku didn't understand. Izuku's heart squeezed a bit when he saw Katsuki's costume. Although it was fairly modernized, and with a few logical alterations, it was obviously based on Izuku's idea. When Katsuki had manifested his quirk, 4-year-old Izuku had offered to draw him a costume design. Even the mask, the one Izuku said looked like butterfly wings, were there. If Katsuki hated him so much, why did he still use his design? Midoriya, you look so cool, really down to earth. When Uraraka spotted him, she complimented his design, but explained her dislike for her own. I should have written what I wanted, mine ended up being a skin-tight bodysuit. What the, seriously, who takes a couple ideas a teenager gave them and makes a costume like that? And for what? To please the media. With a hot 15-year-old. What was wrong with them? Now, shall we begin, you zygotes? Zygotes. The All Might proceeded to explain the heroes versus villains exercise, after a speech that Izuku ignored. Without basic training, the frog girl, he had to ask her name, remarked. Thank you. That's what I was wondering, too. This is the real battle to understand those basics. Izuku wanted to facepalm so bad. All Might was then bombarded by questions, and really seemed unable to answer them on his own. Instead, he took out a Ing handbook, and read aloud the instructions for the exercise, and then took out a box to draw lots for the teams. Not because he couldn't pair the students responsibly, of course. Izuku was glad to be paired with Uraraka, as Team A, and they were assigned to play the heroes. His luck ended there, however. Team A would go against Team D, as the villains, i.e. Katsuki and Iida. Katsuki was probably looking forward to beating him up. Izuku felt it was ironic for himself to be the hero, while Katsuki was the villain. He couldn't say why, but it seemed like a game of fate and something he would look back to later on and laugh. Team D went inside the building, where the fake bomb was located, and Izuku stayed with Uraraka outside while the other students and All Might headed for the monitor room. They were looking through the building's blueprint layout, and Izuku started forming a plan. So, Katsuki will probably come for me first, so Iida-kun will be left to guard the bomb. While I distract Katsuki, you can sneak your way to the bomb. He brainstormed a few ideas that the girls seemed to be in favor of. Okay, Bakugo is the one who makes fun of you, right? It doesn't bother me anymore, Izuku said sincerely. For a long time, I thought he was better than me, in everything. But now, we're in the same school, and I bested him in the entrance exam, and the quirk apprehension test. I won't let him run over me ever again. Izuku had a determined and serious look on his face, and Uraraka seemed to understand. A fated battle between men, huh? Ahaha. Not really, sorry for involving you in this, Izuku said, returning to his awkward and shy persona. We're a team, right? Let's do our best. They walked over their plan, and All Might signaled the start of the combat training. Izuku gave his teammate one of his smoke bombs, and bid her good luck, as she floated herself to the last floor's window. He entered the building and casually made his way upstairs, waiting for a certain explosive boy to charge at him. He barely managed to dodge the explosion that blasted from right behind the corner, as Izuku went to turn right. Come on Deku, don't dodge, the blonde said with a weirdly calm voice. Instead of responding, he prepared himself for another attack. When the expected right swing came, Katsuki always started with one. He took his hand, and with a swift move he learned early on his Aikido lessons, he flipped the boy over his shoulder and onto his back. As Katsuki got up, he yelled into his earpiece. Iida was probably asking what happened, hearing the explosion, but he only got, "Just shut up and defend, I'm angry." As a response, Katsuki propelled himself towards Izuku with a blast from his palm, and went to kick him with his left leg. Izuku was practiced enough to evade and counterattack without a thought. He didn't want to use his quirk in this case. He would seriously injure Katsuki, and as much as he thought the teen deserved it, he didn't want to get into trouble, so he got his staff out of his case and expanded it. He then took advantage of the smoke from the explosions and ran away, giving Uraraka enough time to find the fake bomb. He hid behind a turn, and waited for the blonde to charge. He wouldn't stand a chance. Izuku grinned widely. This was going to be fun. Hey, Deku, don't run away, you coward. Katsuki's shouting echoed in the building. Izuku remained silent in his position behind the turn, waiting to ambush the angry blonde. You have a flashy quirk now, don't you? Then use it. Izuku heard small explosions sounding closer and closer to him. You can try and beat me. But I'm better than you. Izuku rolled his eyes. Katsuki was still full of himself, even though he had already bested him in many instances. He was so set on proving himself, he had, predictably, left Iida to guard the bomb. It was going to be so easy. Where are you, you damn nerd? Katsuki was just around the corner. Izuku raised his staff, ready to attack. Before Katsuki could notice him, Izuku swept the staff on Katsuki's ankles, causing him to fall on his back. He then placed it vertically right above his stomach, and thrust it downwards, enough to make the explosive boy double in pain. Izuku swiftly got behind him, turned him on his stomach and used his legs to pin him in place. He couldn't use the capture tape to bind his arms together, the grenade-shaped things on them were too big to allow that, so he placed his staff under Katsuki's neck and pulled it with his hands. Yield, he grunted in Katsuki's ear. The blonde struggled to breathe, but didn't relent. He made desperate explosions, but Izuku's costume material protected him from any burns, and he could barely feel the heat coming from his opponent's hands. Izuku repeated himself, and Katsuki gave up. He tapped the floor with his grenade things. His hands couldn't reach the floor, and Izuku loosened his grip on the staff, allowing him to take a breath, but didn't let go, thinking the teen would take the first opportunity to fight back. Izuku was right, of course. Katsuki tried to free himself after he got enough air in his lungs, but the green-haired boy knew better. He made a swift move and hit the back of the blonde's head with the steel staff, just hard enough to make him lose consciousness, and maybe give him a mild concussion. He then quickly tied Katsuki's feet together, and used the rest of the capture tape to tie the boy's arms to his torso, so when he woke up, he would struggle to free himself. Izuku tapped his comms and asked Uraraka about her whereabouts. I just found him, and the bomb, on the 4th floor, she whispered. Izuku could hear Iida in the background, getting into the role of a villain, and the girl holding back her laughter. All right, I'm coming up. Don't reveal yourself, wait for me. Izuku didn't wait for a response and quickly made his way upstairs. Iida had already noticed his teammate, and was making a speech as his villain persona. "I knew you would come here alone the instant Bakugo ran off by himself," he announced dramatically. "Your quirk allows you to make the objects you touch float. That is why I put away all the things on this floor before you arrived." Izuku had arrived behind him, so Iida couldn't see him signaling to the girl to throw the smoke bomb he had given her. "Now you cannot play any little tricks. Muahahaha. You have blundered." As the smoke filled the room, Izuku took advantage of the boy's decreased visibility, and ran silently towards the bomb. As the smoke dispersed, All Might's voice boomed from the speakers, "The hero team wins." Just as Katsuki appeared behind them with wide eyes. No, the explosive team seemed less upset about losing, than losing to Izuku. Although the green-haired teen had already bested him in more ways than one, this was Katsuki's first direct loss to him. He had started mumbling about how Izuku didn't even use his quirk and still beat him. His breathing had started to quicken. His eyes were red and he was obviously freaking out, and Izuku almost pitied him. Almost. Their two other classmates had already left the building, and before Izuku could call him out and leave, All Might called for them to come to the monitor room to review their results. That seemed to snap Katsuki out of his spiral, and Izuku left him to gather himself. He's finally realized I'm not the useless kid beneath him. Go figure. After Yaomomo provided a very thorough review of the whole exercise and every team's rights and wrongs, Izuku listened carefully so he could write them down later. The rest of the battle simulations went on smoothly. Izuku was only half paying attention. He took notes on his classmates' quirks, strengths, weaknesses and strategies almost on autopilot, having done so for years, over pro heroes and villains alike. His new series, UA, Hero Analysis, would consist of information exclusively on hero students and staff of the school. His analysis was more than just a hobby, now. It was a safety net, incredibly useful and dangerous, if fallen in the wrong hands. An asset that would aid him tremendously when the eventual fallout with the heroes begins. He didn't even realize when all his classmates had taken part in the exercise, until All Might announced the end of class and school day, before bolting out of ground beta, leaving the students to wonder what that was about. Izuku wasted no time gathering his stuff and leaving right after he changed out of his, thankfully, unscathed costume. His research and instructions to the support department had paid off. He didn't have Aikido training today, so he headed straight to Himiko-chan's place. She had texted him during class about having good news she wanted to share, and since his mom didn't come home from work until later in the evening, he was free to meet his friend. His homework could wait until later. Izuku had gotten her a smartphone a couple weeks after they met. Now that she had someone that she actually wanted to keep contact with, and she barely made, i.e. stole, enough money to stay alive, she had tried to steal one from an electronics store, but they had better security than she expected, and almost got arrested. So, Izuku just used some of his savings to provide her a cheap model, and she was more than happy to treat him to dinner the next day. Of course, she didn't buy the food, or steal it for that matter. In fact, she had located a middle-aged man who had been charged with UAL assault of a minor, and had been convicted for only 5 months, due to lack of sufficient evidence. Himiko-chan was bloodthirsty one day, and when she recognized him from the news, gazing the children playing in the local elementary school's yard, she followed him home and satiated her thirst. She spared Izuku the details, but they enjoyed a lustrous meal that evening. He barely made it inside the familiar building, when his best friend all but crushed him into a hug, like they hadn't seen each other the day before. "Izuku-chan, how did school go? Did you kick ass today?" She took him by the arm and dragged him by the stairs to the first floor, where she had taken refuge, as she bombarded him with questions. "I did, actually." He didn't hide the huge grin that appeared on his face, while he explained in detail how his second day of school went, how he absolutely crushed his friend-turned-bully and gave him an existential crisis. Himiko didn't even attempt to conceal her excitement and pride for her friend, peppering him with compliments that were almost too much for him, not being used to people commending on his accomplishments. "So, what did you want to tell me?" He questioned, changing the subject. Your text seemed very enthusiastic. Right, so, I was taking a stroll in the market yesterday, after you left. She rambled a bit about how she wanted to replace one of her favorite knives, that someone broke as she attacked them to take their blood, before Izuku got her back on track. I overheard some people talking about this super cool broker, that would accept any job for the right price. I remembered how you said yesterday that you wanted connections to gather information against the commission, so I asked them how could I get into contact with him. Hamiko, that's great. Izuku instantly lit up. Gods, he loved his friend. What did they say? Well, after they made fun of me, because what business does a little girl have with him? She mocked their words with funny faces, making Izuku laugh. I, of course, attacked them and licked their blood off of my knife to make them listen to me. They did. They both burst into giggles before she continued. His name is Jiren. He usually scouts and approaches people before they can find him, but I didn't mention anything about you or your plan. She then told him about an acquaintance of his that she got info for, and gave him her phone to contact them. She didn't mind getting tracked, promising to make use of her weapon collection, if it came to it, and Izuku got straight to work. His appointment was in 2 days, on midnight. Izuku sighed, as he saw the swarm of reporters at the entrance of UA. They had been gathering outside the main gate for a couple of days now, since word got out that All Might would be teaching there. Yesterday was the hero's first lesson, so more journalists were bound to turn up and pester any student or staff member they saw. Izuku did his best to avoid them as he got closer to the gate, but he wasn't as stealthy as he hoped. A woman with a microphone spotted him and started bombarding him with questions about the number 1 hero's teaching, that Izuku did his best to deflect and enter the school. Uraraka and Iida weren't so lucky, being surrounded by other reporters. Polite and heroic as they were, they answered a few questions before Aizawa came to save the day. Not intentionally, people were just surprised to see an almost homeless-looking man working there. The woman who had invaded Izuku's personal space, Katsuki's too, she had recognized him from the sludge villain incident, tried to enter the school, but as she didn't have an ID or pass, the security system activated the UA barrier, as they called it, safely cutting them off. Right after class started, Aizawa congratulated his students on their combat training yesterday, and provided them some thoughts and advice. He even told Katsuki to stop acting like a child, being talented and all. Izuku failed to hold back a snort, gaining a glare from the blonde, and stifled giggles from a few of his classmates. Aizawa then declared it was time for them to decide on a class representative, resulting in half his classmates proclaiming their desire to be elected. Izuku didn't restrain himself from taking Monetta's head and banging it on his desk, when he heard his comment about making it mandatory for all the girls' skirts being 30 centimeters above the knee. Thankfully, Aizawa pretended not to notice. Izuku even got a smile from Yaomomo for his intervention. Honestly, allowing a disgusting pervert like him in a hero school in the first place was infuriating. Silence, please. The classroom turned quiet at Iida's loud request. If everyone respected the boy enough to stop their shenanigans, he should be the class representative, in Izuku's opinion. He even suggested an election for the class to choose one, and got everyone to cooperate. Aizawa resigned himself in his caterpillar sleeping bag, requesting to wake him up when they chose someone, leaving the students to do their thing. Most of them got a vote, probably from themselves, but what surprised Izuku the most was himself gaining 3 votes, while he used his for voting the stiff boy. Yaomomo, who got second place with 2 votes, was his other choice, but she was too unsure of herself to take initiatives and responsibility, so he opted for their engine-quirked classmate instead. After Katsuki, oh, so kindly, expressed his dissatisfaction over Izuku winning the election, the green-haired boy spoke his mind about the development, before their teacher would officiate the results. Oh, I don't want it. He shied away from his classmates' surprised reactions, and explained how he doesn't do well with crowds and would rather give his place to someone who actually wanted the job. He offered his place to Iida, explaining his reasoning, before receiving mixed responses, and a quite lengthy thank you speech from his classmate. He genuinely didn't want it, mostly because he didn't want any responsibilities, but also because he didn't want anything more to do with the hero school, if he could help it. Besides, he really wasn't great with crowds. When his morning classes ended, Aizawa officially announced Iida as class president, and Yaoyorozu as vice. He took out his bento box and chose the most secluded table in the cafeteria to eat his lunch in peace and quiet. He saw a couple classmates looking for him, but he didn't want to interact with anyone, more than he had to, from his class. He saw a couple students who had done the same, one of them being Todoroki, the other a purple-haired boy he didn't recognize. As he finished his lunch, an alarm started ringing, and an automated voice sounded from the speakers. There has been a level 3 security breach. All students please evacuate outdoors. Chaos erupted in the cafeteria. Everyone rushed towards the exit, pushing and tripping over each other as they tried to make their way through the too narrow for the whole student body hallways leading towards the exits. Izuku overheard a third year explaining it meant someone had trespassed on school grounds. He thought a reporter from this morning had managed to get through the gate barrier, at first, but the press overriding Nezu's security was quite unlikely. He wondered if there was something else going on behind the scenes. Izuku calmly got up and headed towards the windows, and indeed saw the press swarming his teachers, demanding information about All Might. Not an emergency, then. He stayed in the cafeteria while everyone was panicking, until Iida managed to calm them down, and headed towards the classroom. He couldn't wait for this day to be over. He jinxed it. That day seemed endless. Hero training was particularly hard today, mostly because All Might made all of them attack him at the same time, until no one could stand upright. It seemed like the hero had no clue what to teach them for foundational heroics, and blurted out the first thing that came to mind. Izuku barely had time to get home and change, to get to his Aikido class in time. He was already really tired by the end of training, but Himiko, who came to get him right after, insisted on finally teaching him how to wield throwing knives properly, now that, according to her, he had become a pro in close combat and sneak attacks with her weapon of choice. And so, by the time Izuku left Himiko's place, he felt like a walking corpse. The universe, however, was set on tormenting him. As he walked home, barely keeping his eyes open, he heard the distinct sounds of people fighting nearby. Tired as he was, he intended to completely ignore the two people in the alleyway, until he caught a glimpse of the man Izuku recognized as the pro-hero Odd Eye. Although he didn't know much about the hero, he noticed his peculiar costume, that bore numerous magical symbols, as well as his eye patch, that he usually wore over his right, perfectly functioning, eye, and was now discarded on the ground. The hero was desperately trying to touch the person attacking him, to activate his quirk, but he ended up collapsing, as a katana was pierced through his chest. Izuku watched silently from behind the corner of the alley, as the pro-hero took his last breath, while his attacker, whose silhouette suggested they were an adult man, stood above him, making sure he had killed his target. Now that he wasn't moving, and he was incredibly fast before, Izuku was able to take a look at the ruthless killer. His clothes were tattered, as well as the white fabric he used as a mask. Bandages were wrapped around his arms, and he had numerous knives and other weapons strapped on the front of his chest. The most notable thing about him, though, were his blood-red scarf and matching headband. Izuku froze when red irises locked on his wide, green eyes. The killer slowly approached him, as he wiped the blood off of his katana on his pants and placed it in its case on his back. Izuku, who would normally have taken a defensive stance, found himself petrified by the man's murderous aura, which was strange, considering he had put back his weapon and was casually walking towards the greenette. "Is there something you want, kid?" the man sneered. Izuku didn't reply, he just stared at him with wide eyes, jaw clenched shut. "Don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you, unless you give me a reason to," he chuckled. "I only go after fake heroes, anyway." Izuku's eyes somehow turned wider. That wasn't something he expected to hear. The man's pure bloodlust didn't exactly scream purge the world of fake heroes. Still, he found himself intrigued, and stayed where he was, waiting to see whether the masked person, who had stopped a few meters in front of him, had anything else to say. "You know, I don't actually enjoy killing. I didn't want to stain my hands with the blood of these so-called heroes. He said the word with such disgust. Izuku could relate, but someone has to cleanse the world of those who become heroes for fame or money. Someone has to change this broken society. So you decided to do it yourself, Izuku blurted out. Even though he was terrified, and he thought the man would murder him on the spot for interrupting his speech, he couldn't stop himself. That's right. The man didn't seem at all bothered by his intervention. On the contrary, he looked amused and even excited to have someone not actively dying to preach his ideals to. I've come to realize that words, peace and diplomacy are useless. Only actions and violence can change heroics and fix this society, and I won't stop my purge of those pro-heroes until the world actually realizes the flaws in the heroics system. As he finished speaking, he took a look at Izuku, who had relaxed considerably, compared to a couple minutes before. What do you think about this, kid? He asked, a dry laugh escaping his lips. I agree, Izuku found himself saying, surprising the man before him. For some incredibly peculiar reason, the teenager felt somewhat comfortable, and agreeing with him. They shared the same views, after all, minus the whole killing thing. I mean, the whole system is built on the trust people have on heroes. The Hero Commission just took advantage of that and are now in control of a society where they prioritize appearances and the image of the heroes they promote, without actually caring whether or not they actually save or endanger civilians. They have ended up protecting heroes that are actually worse than the villains they supposedly protect us from. Izuku had entered rambling mode, one he thought he had grown out of. Apparently, meeting someone he could rant about his true ideals to, apart from Himiko, of course, was enough to bring out his old habit. And don't even get me started on some of the top heroes, like that flaming trash can of a number 2. He has killed more people with his quirk during arrest attempts than ones he actually apprehended. The Commission is protecting them just to keep up the image of their perfect system with their perfect heroes, without giving a about the lives they destroy in the process. The murderer in front of him stared at him for a few seconds, baffled by Izuku's words, before bursting into laughter. Damn, I really wasn't expecting a kid your age to have such ideas. What's your name? Izuku opened his mouth to answer, but then thought better of it and clenched it shut. He wasn't about to reveal his name to a random killer, no matter how much he agreed with him. Smart choice, kid, I'll give you mine, anyway. I go by Stain. Nice to meet you. He bowed dramatically, and widened the grin that had appeared on his face. You're absolutely right, you know. Most heroes out there are fakes. They flaunt their power and chase petty dreams. They don't deserve to be called heroes. True heroes do not desire anything in return for their actions. They don't boast their accomplishments. He clenched his fists and had a determined look on his face, what Izuku could see of it, anyway. Only those who commit the ultimate acts of self-sacrifice are worthy of the title of a true hero, like All Might. Izuku snorted lightly. So, he's another All Might fan. He doesn't blame him, he was one himself, before learning the truth. Stain gave him a sharp glare, but Izuku didn't feel like apologizing. You'd be surprised, he murmured instead. Care to elaborate? Stain asked, curiosity and disbelief obvious in his tone. Izuku sighed, as he sat on the ground, with his back on the wall. He was exhausted, after all, and he had a feeling this conversation would take some time. Don't get me wrong, he's not a bad hero, and he doesn't deserve to die. Izuku defended himself, he didn't want to join the dead pro-hero laying just a few meters away from him. But you know heroes aren't always as they present themselves on the media. All Might is no exception. He's still human, and he has secrets. He paused, thinking he shouldn't spill the symbol of peace's greatest secret. Not yet. Instead, he chose to tell his own story, one only Himiko knew. The hero killer didn't speak, or ask him to explain. Instead, he listened intently, like Izuku held the secrets of the universe, and he was about to reveal them to him. It's kinda personal too, to be honest. He smiled bitterly. He saved me from a villain, a year ago. Back then, I was a hero fanboy all the way, so when I saw my favorite hero, I wanted to ask him a question. He proceeded to explain how the number 1 hero shattered his quirkless 14-year-old self's dreams, and spilled his secret, that Izuku didn't reveal, before leaving him alone on a roof. How the hero sat still and watched, like all the other heroes present, while a kid was being suffocated by the sludge villain. That he only rushed in after a middle schooler put himself in danger to save his peer. He left out the part where he tried to patch things up later by offering him a quirk. He didn't say how he was a terrible heroics teacher, because if he did, he would betray his identity as a hero student, and that would seem controversial to his opinions. Never mind the whole situation where he made Izuku his successor and everything he had to endure during his training with him. So, you see, he's not as perfect as he seems. Izuku sighed. Heroes aren't invincible, even All Might. Still, he made himself seem like a flawless protector, a true hero, in your words. He puts on a fake smile, and ensures that everyone will be fine as long as he's around. But what happens when he gets seriously injured? When he grows older and weaker and can't keep up? When he stops being the symbol of peace? And it will happen, sooner or later, it will break society. At that point, he was mumbling, more to himself than the man listening to him. He had been holding a deeply buried resentment towards the hero. He couldn't ever let it show, especially in front of the heroes and his classmates, and had an opportunity to finally let it out. His fatigue was getting the better of him. He rubbed his face with his hands, and glanced at the hero killer, who had yet to say a word. He had just changed his idol's image, after all. Izuku could understand, and he hadn't even told him the whole story. "You're an interesting kid," he ended up grunting. "I look forward to hearing your thoughts again," he said, before swiftly climbing on the fire escape of the building and onto the roof, leaving a confused Izuku alone in the alley, with a corpse to give him company. To be continued. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.